My name is Blair. I am 33 years old, and my brother smashed my knee with a metal rod because I told his fiancée he already had a wife. My mother actually clapped and said finally, someone put the trash in its place. He had no idea what I would do next. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Chicago winters are notoriously brutal, but the chill inside the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was entirely man-made. It was the engagement party of the season. My 35-year-old brother Preston was celebrating his upcoming union to Courtney, a 28-year-old heiress to one of the largest media empires in the Midwest. The room overflowed with elaborate crystal centerpieces, imported white roses, and the city elite sipping top-tier champagne. To them, Preston was a highly successful luxury real estate mogul. To me, he was a desperate fraud drowning in toxic debt. I stood near the coat check, smoothing down my understated black dress, an outfit my 60-year-old mother Beverly had criticized the moment I arrived. I was just the corporate liquidator, the boring sister who restructured failing companies, an occupation my family deemed completely unglamorous and frankly beneath them. They treated me like a lower-class citizen in my own family. They had absolutely no idea that my firm had been wildly successful or that I possessed more hidden wealth and power than everyone in that glittering ballroom combined. I watched Courtney approach the cloakroom to grab her designer wrap. She looked radiant, completely oblivious to the financial and emotional ruin awaiting her. I stepped into her path, blocking her way back to the party. She sighed, a deeply annoyed expression crossing her delicate, privileged features. "What do you want, Blair?" she asked, rolling her eyes. "Preston said you were just here to ruin the mood and drag everyone down with your negativity." I pulled a glossy photograph from my clutch and slid it across the cold marble counter toward her. It was a picture taken 4 years ago at a local courthouse. It showed Preston smiling, holding hands with a stunning African-American woman named Simone. "He is already married to Courtney," I said, keeping my voice low and incredibly steady. "Simone is an IRS special agent and his legal wife. They never filed the divorce papers correctly. He is committing bigamy. Do not sign that joint investment account with him tomorrow morning. He does not love you. He is only after your family money to cover his massive debts." Courtney stared at the photograph. The color completely drained from her face, replaced almost instantly by a flush of defensive rage. She raised her hand and struck my cheek with a resounding slap that echoed sharply in the quiet corridor. "You are a pathetic, lying spinster," Courtney hissed, snatching the photo and tearing it into pieces. "You have always been jealous of him because he is the golden child and you are nothing. I am going to tell Preston exactly what you just tried to do." She turned on her heel and ran back toward the ballroom, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. I touched my stinging cheek, taking a slow, calculated breath. I had tried to warn her. The rest of the fallout was entirely on Preston. Within minutes, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open violently. Preston stormed into the hallway, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Before I could even speak a word, he grabbed my arm with a crushing grip, his fingers digging deeply into my skin. He did not say a word as he dragged me roughly through the service doors, past the startled kitchen staff, and out into the freezing dark alley behind the hotel. The icy air hit me like a physical wall. Preston shoved me incredibly hard against the brick exterior of the building. I stumbled, struggling to catch my balance on the slippery, ice-covered pavement. "Are you completely insane?" He spat his breath, forming white clouds in the freezing night air. "You think you can sabotage my wedding? You think you can walk in here and ruin my perfect life with your ridiculous lies?" "It is not a lie," I replied, refusing to back down or show fear. "You used a fake notary for the divorce papers. Simone found out because she works for the federal government. The state rejected the filing entirely. You are still legally married to her, and if you sign those financial mergers with Courtney tomorrow, you are committing a felony. You are going to prison." Preston looked genuinely panicked for a fraction of a second before his characteristic arrogance returned. He walked over to his luxury SUV parked near the hotel dumpsters and popped the trunk. I expected him to grab his phone to call his lawyer or maybe his coat. Instead, he pulled out a heavy, solid metal tire iron. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, but I stood my ground staring him down. "You are not going to do this, Preston," I warned him, my voice unwavering. He marched back toward me, the metal rod swinging menacingly at his side. "You have always been a thorn in my side, Blair. A boring, plain little bean counter who just cannot stand to see her own brother win. You need to learn a permanent lesson about minding your own business and staying in your place." Before I could even react or raise my arms to defend myself, Preston swung the heavy tire iron with terrifying lethal force directly into my right kneecap. The impact was deafening. The bone shattered with a sickening wet crunch that echoed off the brick walls of the alley. A scream tore from my throat, a sound of absolute blinding agony that I did not even recognize as my own. My leg gave out instantly, and I collapsed onto the freezing wet concrete, clutching my destroyed knee as unspeakable pain radiated through my entire body. Through the blur of hot tears and searing pain, I heard the metal service door click open again. My mother Beverly stepped out into the alley, her expensive fur coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She looked down at me, writhing in agony on the freezing ground, then looked at Preston holding the bloodied metal rod. I expected shock. I expected a mother rushing forward to help her bleeding, injured daughter. Instead, Beverly smiled widely and clapped her hands together in delight. "Finally," she said, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "Someone put the trash in its place. You have always been so jealous of your brother's success, Blair. You deserve exactly what you get for trying to ruin his perfect night. Leave her here, Preston. The cold will do her some good." They turned their backs on me without a second glance. Preston tossed the tire iron back into his trunk, slammed it shut, and proudly escorted my mother back inside the warm, glittering hotel, leaving me bleeding and broken on the ice. I gasped for air, fighting the overwhelming wave of nausea and shock. I managed to drag myself a few inches to lean against the rough brick wall, pulling my phone from my fallen clutch with trembling, blood-stained fingers. I dialed emergency services, my voice barely a whisper, as I gave the dispatcher my exact location. As I lay on the concrete waiting for the ambulance sirens to cut through the Chicago night, my phone vibrated warmly in my palm. The screen illuminated the dark alley. It was a text message from Simone, the brilliant, fierce African-American woman who was still legally bound to the monster who just shattered my leg. I read the message through blurred vision. "I heard he just crossed the line. Check your email. The financial slaughter begins tonight." A cold, dangerous smile touched my lips despite the agonizing pain radiating from my crushed knee. My family thought I was just a broken scapegoat, a useless corporate drone they could discard in an alley like garbage. They had absolutely no idea the kind of devastating power I held, or the absolute ruin that Simone and I were about to rain down upon their entire fake empire. My name is Blair, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the recovery room burned through my eyelids before I even opened them. A dull, rhythmic beeping from the heart monitor next to my bed was the only sound cutting through the thick, sterile silence. When I tried to shift my weight, a blinding shockwave of agony tore up my right leg. I gasped, my eyes flying open to find a massive steel-caged brace completely immobilizing my leg. Thick surgical pins protruded from the bandaged flesh around my shattered kneecap. Preston had swung that tire iron with every intention of destroying me, and the physical damage was severe. But the real nightmare was standing right beside my bed. My mother Beverly loomed over me, her pristine designer coat perfectly draped over her shoulders. She wore an expression of manufactured maternal concern that made my stomach turn. Standing right next to her was Preston, his custom-tailored suit completely unwrinkled, his hands casually shoved into his pockets. At the foot of my hospital bed stood a uniformed Chicago police officer, a notepad ready in his hand. The officer stepped forward, his tone professional and gentle. "Miss, you are at Northwestern Memorial. You suffered a severe blunt force trauma to your patella. Can you tell me exactly who attacked you in the alley behind the hotel?" I opened my mouth to say my brother's name. I was ready to watch the heavy steel handcuffs click around Preston's wrists right there in the recovery ward. But before I could form the first syllable, Beverly lunged forward. She threw her arms around my torso in what looked to the officer like a desperate, loving hug. To me, it was a physical threat. Beverly dug her manicured acrylic nails brutally into my uninjured left thigh, pinching the skin through the thin hospital blanket with enough force to draw blood. She pressed her face against my cheek, her overpowering floral perfume suffocating me. "Tell the cop. It was a random mugging," Beverly whispered directly into my ear, her voice a venomous hiss disguised as a motherly sob. "If you mention Preston, I swear to you right now I will drain every single cent of the college trust fund your grandfather left you. I will use your own money to pay for the best defense lawyers in Chicago. He will walk free and you will be a broke cripple living on the street. Do you understand me?" She dug her nails deeper, twisting the skin until I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. She pulled back, turning her fake tear-filled eyes toward the police officer. "My poor girl is just so traumatized," Beverly cried, resting a perfectly steady hand on my shoulder. She was just stepping out for some fresh air when a masked man jumped her for her purse. "Is that right, Blair?" I looked at my mother. I looked at the golden child standing beside her, a smug, untouchable smirk playing on his lips. If I accused him now, it would be my word against the Golden Boy CEO and the wealthy matriarch of the family. They would tie me up in litigation for years, smearing my name and draining my resources. I did not want a messy, prolonged court battle that would end with a slap on the wrist. I wanted a total, undeniable slaughter. I wanted to dismantle his entire life piece by piece. "It was a mugger," I told the officer, forcing my voice to sound weak and terrified. "He was wearing a dark ski mask. He hit me from behind and ran. I never saw his face." Beverly let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. The officer nodded, writing down my false statement, promising they would check the hotel perimeter cameras, though Preston and I both knew that specific loading dock was a blind spot. The officer tipped his hat and walked out the heavy wooden door to file his report. The second the door clicked shut, the fake tears vanished from Beverly's face. She grabbed a sanitizing wipe from the bedside table and rigorously wiped her hands as if touching me had infected her. Preston stepped up to the edge of the bed, leaning over me with a look of absolute disgust. He reeked of expensive bourbon and unearned arrogance. "You actually thought you could ruin my wedding?" Preston sneered, his face inches from mine. "You really think anyone is going to listen to a low-level accountant? I am a CEO. I am marrying into a media empire next week. You are just a bitter, lonely woman pushing numbers on a spreadsheet. Who do you think the cops will believe? Who do you think society will believe?" "You should be thanking your brother for letting you live," Beverly chimed in, adjusting her diamond necklace in the mirror above the sink. "You have always been a genetic disappointment to this family. Preston is building a legacy. You are just a liability. If you ever try to contact his fiancée again, I will personally see to it that you never work in this city again." I stared up at them, keeping my facial muscles entirely relaxed. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just absorbed their arrogance, locking it away as fuel for what was coming next. "Enjoy the wedding, Preston," I said coldly. "Oh, I will," he laughed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Have fun paying your medical bills on a bookkeeper's salary." They turned around and walked out of the hospital room together, completely confident they had silenced me forever. They thought they had won. They thought I was beaten. 5 seconds later, the hospital door swung open again. The woman who stepped into the room commanded immediate respect. She was tall, radiant, and dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue federal suit that screamed authority. Her dark skin glowed under the harsh hospital lights, and her presence instantly shifted the entire atmosphere of the room from clinical to dangerous. It was Simone Preston's actual legal African-American wife, the woman he thought he had successfully discarded with forged documents. She walked straight to my bedside, her heels clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. She did not offer me pity or meaningless platitudes about my shattered knee. Instead, she reached into her tailored blazer and pulled out a gold federal badge, dropping it heavily onto my tray table. The letters IRS special agent, caught the light. Next, she placed my sleek silver work laptop right beside her badge. They think you are just a broken scapegoat, Blair Simone said, a fierce predatory smile spreading across her beautiful face. They think you are just some basic accountant they can step on. Let us show them what a high-level corporate liquidator and an IRS special agent can do to a fake millionaire. I felt a surge of pure adrenaline block out the pain in my shattered leg. I reached out and flipped open the laptop. The screen booted up, illuminating my face with a cool digital glow. He likes to pretend he is untouchable, I replied, my fingers flying across the encrypted keyboard as I logged into the federal corporate auditing system. Let us see exactly how clean his CEO seat really is. The glaring fluorescent lights of the hospital room reflected off the polished silver surface of my laptop. Simone pulled up a harsh plastic visitor chair and sat down with the perfect posture of a woman who destroyed tax evaders for a living. She wore a tailored navy suit that commanded the room, and her dark eyes were fixed on my screen. She did not offer me a tissue or a sympathetic pat on the hand. We both knew pity was useless right now. We needed ammunition. Simone reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, dropping it onto my lap right next to my heavily bandaged knee. I winced slightly as the weight shifted the surgical pins, but my focus remained entirely on the documents spilling out across the sterile white hospital blanket. "Open it," she commanded quietly. Her voice was smooth and dangerously calm. I flipped open the cover. Inside was a stack of official court filings from the state of Illinois. The top page was a petition for dissolution of marriage. I recognized Preston's signature immediately, the arrogant wide loops he always used to make himself feel important. Beside it was a signature that supposedly belonged to Simone. "He forged your signature," I said, looking up at her in absolute disbelief. "He actually forged a federal agent's signature on a legal document." Simone let out a sharp, humorless laugh that held zero warmth. "He did more than just forge my name, Blair. He tried to fast-track a fake divorce because he is absolutely desperate for cash. Preston assumed that since my division transferred me to the Washington office for 8 months last year, I would never see the local county filings. He thought he could quietly dissolve our marriage without my knowledge, secure a clean legal status, and marry that naive media heiress to save his sinking ship." I stared at the pages, analyzing the stamp at the bottom. "But this has a notary seal. How did he get a notary to sign off on a forged signature without you being present in the room?" Simone pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the blue ink of the notary stamp. "Look closer at the registration number on that stamp, Blair. It belongs to an expired license from a discount mail order service. He used a cheap fake notary stamp he bought online. He thought the county clerk would just push the paperwork through the system without verifying the credentials. He was wrong. The state of Illinois flagged the fraudulent stamp and rejected the entire divorce filing." A cold wave of realization washed over me. "He never followed up," I said, piecing the timeline together. "He filed the fake papers, assumed the state processed them, and moved straight into proposing to Courtney." "Exactly," Simone replied, leaning back in her chair. "He is so blinded by his own arrogance that he never bothered to check if the court actually finalized the dissolution. The clerk threw his paperwork in the rejection pile 3 months ago. As of this exact second, I am still his lawful wedded wife. If he stands at that altar next week and says vows to Courtney, he is committing felony bigamy." I looked at the federal badge resting on my tray table, and then up at my sister-in-law. My brother had always been a greedy narcissist, but I never imagined he was stupid enough to cross an IRS special agent. "Why Courtney?" I asked, typing her family name into my secure corporate database. Out of all the wealthy women in Chicago, why is he rushing to marry her specifically? "Because her father owns the largest private media conglomerate in the Midwest," Simone explained, her eyes narrowing as she outlined the motive. "Preston is running a massive shell game. His luxury real estate firm has not closed a legitimate deal in 2 years. He has been moving money around to create the illusion of wealth, but the walls are closing in. Once he marries Courtney, they are scheduled to sign a joint investment account. He plans to use her family money to quietly pay off his hidden creditors before anyone realizes he is completely broke. My laptop chimed with a harsh electronic ping interrupting our strategy session. I glanced at the corner of my screen. A text message from Preston had just bypassed my blocked caller list using an anonymous web number. I clicked the notification and my blood ran ice cold. It was a photograph of my apartment living room. Sitting in the center of my rug was my beloved rescue golden retriever, Barnaby. Preston was holding Barnaby by the collar, pulling tightly enough to make the dog look uncomfortable. A second message popped up immediately beneath the photo. "You should have stayed out of my business, Blair. If you ever try to contact my fiancé again, or if you try to ruin my wedding, I will take this mutt for a long drive and let him loose on the Dan Ryan Expressway during rush hour. Keep your mouth shut and stay in your hospital bed." Panic flared in my chest, but I forced it down instantly. I refused to let my brother use the only thing I loved as leverage. I looked at Simone and turned the laptop screen toward her so she could see the explicit threat. Her jaw tightened and a lethal silence filled the hospital room. "He broke into your apartment," Simone stated, stating the fact with chilling precision. "He is threatening an animal to protect a marriage built on federal fraud. He thinks he has me trapped," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He thinks breaking my leg and threatening my dog makes him a powerful real estate mogul." I pulled the laptop back toward me and cracked my knuckles. "I am a corporate restructuring specialist. I dismantle empires for a living." I opened my proprietary trading terminal, which gave me direct access to institutional debt markets. I ran a search for his specific holding company, pulling up the unlisted financial data that regular civilians could never access. Rows of red numbers flooded my screen. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the glowing data. "His holding company is drowning in $4 million of toxic debt. He took out predatory mezzanine loans just to keep his leased sports cars and fake office space. The lender is about to force him into bankruptcy by the end of the month." Simone leaned forward, watching the screen intently. "Can you seize it?" I did not answer right away. I executed a sequence of keystrokes transferring capital from my highly classified offshore restructuring fund. My firm specialized in buying distressed debt at a discount and holding the owners completely hostage. I bypassed the standard waiting periods using my senior executive clearance. I selected the entirety of Preston's $4 million debt portfolio. I clicked the purchase button. A green confirmation banner flashed across my screen. I looked up at Simone, an icy smile breaking across my face. "I do not need to panic, Simone. I just bought his debt. I own his entire company now." 3 days after Simone walked into my recovery room, the hospital finally cleared me for discharge. I traded the sterile white hospital bed for a heavy, cumbersome medical boot that locked my shattered right leg into a rigid, unforgiving angle. The doctor handed me a pair of aluminum crutches and a prescription for strong painkillers. I threw the prescription in the trash the moment he left the room. I needed my mind razor sharp. Simone had already returned to her federal office to process the official paperwork asserting her legal status as Preston's wife, effectively freezing his ability to apply for new marriage licenses in the state. The trap was set. Now I just needed to collect my personal documents and a few sentimental items from my childhood bedroom before bringing the hammer down on my brother's crumbling empire. My rideshare pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the family estate in Lake Forest just as the afternoon sun dipped behind the trees. The sprawling Tudor-style mansion had always been Beverly's crowning achievement. It was paid for entirely by my late father's hard work, but ruthlessly controlled by my mother to project an image of generational wealth. As the car rolled up the long circular driveway, a chaotic and humiliating scene unfolded on the immaculate front lawn. Designer dresses, childhood photo albums, and stacks of my personal books were strewn across the damp grass. My winter coats were draped haphazardly over the meticulously trimmed hedges. Standing on the grand stone portico, looking down at the mess like a queen surveying a conquered village, was Beverly. She was casually tossing my shoes over the marble railing, her face twisted in a mask of absolute disdain. I paid the driver, adjusted my grip on the crutches, and swung my body toward the front steps. Every movement sent a sickening jolt of pain up through my hip, but I forced my facial muscles to remain entirely impassive. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me wince. Beverly paused mid-throw, a cashmere sweater dangling loosely from her manicured hand. She looked down at my heavy medical boot, then at the aluminum crutches bracing my weight. A cruel, barking laugh escaped her lips, echoing loudly across the quiet suburban estate. "Look at you," Beverly sneered, tossing the sweater onto a muddy patch of grass. "A crippled spinster dragging herself up my driveway." "I told you to stay out of sight, Blair." I hobbled closer, stopping at the base of the stone steps. I kept my voice perfectly level. "You are destroying my property, Mother." She rolled her eyes, stepping down one stair to loom over me, her heavy floral perfume practically suffocating the fresh air. "This is my property. You have lived under my roof and eaten my food for far too long. I tolerated your pathetic, quiet little life because you were convenient, but you crossed a line when you tried to ruin Preston's future." He attacked me with a tire iron, I stated plainly, looking right into her eyes. "And you deserved it," she snapped back without a single ounce of hesitation. "Preston is marrying a media heiress next week. He is elevating this family to the elite circles of Chicago society. He is building a dynasty, and what are you doing? Pushing paper for a mediocre salary. You are an ugly reminder of everything ordinary. You are a genetic disappointment, Blair." I looked at the scattered remnants of my life. There was the silver locket my father gave me before he died, lying open in a puddle of mud. Beverly had never hidden her preference for Preston. When I won a full academic scholarship to study corporate finance, she skipped my graduation ceremony to help Preston pick out a luxury sports car that he immediately crashed. She had spent decades treating me like an unpaid assistant, a convenient scapegoat whenever her golden boy failed. She actually believed she held all the power because she lived in a big house and wore expensive jewelry. She had absolutely no idea who I really was or what I did for a living. "You are no longer welcome in my house," Beverly declared, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward the street. "I am changing the security codes today. Gather your trash and get off my lawn before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. And remember our deal. If you breathe a word about Preston to the cops, I will bankrupt you." I did not scream. I did not cry over the ruined photos or the mud-stained clothes. I simply balanced my weight heavily on my left crutch, reached down, and carefully picked up my silver work laptop from where it had landed safely on a soft patch of grass. I brushed a single blade of grass off the aluminum casing. It was the only item on that lawn I actually needed. I looked up at Beverly, meeting her arrogant glare with eyes as cold as dead space. "That is perfectly fine, Mother," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the expansive driveway. "I have no intention of staying here anyway." Beverly crossed her arms, a triumphant, ugly smirk playing on her lips. "Good. Then hobble away and stay in whatever cheap apartment you can afford." I tucked the laptop securely under my arm. "Oh, I am leaving," I agreed casually, adjusting my grip on the crutches. "But I think you misunderstood the financial reality of this family." Beverly frowned, her smirk faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made her take a sudden half-step back. "I am talking about your golden boy. Preston likes to play the wealthy CEO, but his real estate holding company has not generated a dime of actual profit in 2 years. He kept his luxury cars and his penthouse office by taking out massive predatory mezzanine loans. Millions of dollars in toxic debt that he could never repay." Beverly's face paled, the fake tan suddenly looking very artificial against her white skin. "Preston is fine. He is marrying Courtney. Her family has billions." "He is never going to marry Courtney," I corrected smoothly, "because as of yesterday his federal divorce was rejected due to a forged notary stamp. He is still legally married to Simone. There will be no wedding, and there will be no bailout from a media heiress." Beverly grabbed the stone railing, her knuckles turning white. "You are lying. You are just a jealous, bitter little girl." I tapped the silver laptop under my arm. "I am a corporate restructuring specialist, Mother. I buy and liquidate distressed assets for a living. I opened my system from the hospital bed yesterday and purchased the entirety of Preston's $4 million debt portfolio. I own his company now. Every desk, every bank account, every liability. I took one step closer, forcing Beverly to look down at me. And since you co-signed all of Preston's business loans to fund his fake billionaire lifestyle, and since you used this exact estate as collateral for those toxic loans, I paused, letting the absolute horror wash over her face as the realization finally hit her. I am calling in the debt today, which means, Mother, you might want to start packing too. My aluminum crutches clicked rhythmically against the imported Italian tile of the upscale River North Cafe. Every step sent a dull throb radiating from my shattered kneecap up to my hip. The heavy medical boot was a clumsy anchor dragging me down, but I kept my posture rigidly straight. I navigated through the maze of small tables, ignoring the stares of the morning crowd. I spotted them immediately. Preston was sitting in a plush leather booth bathed in the natural light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wore a charcoal gray bespoke suit, looking every inch the successful real estate magnate he pretended to be. Sitting beside him was Courtney. She was draped in quiet luxury, wearing a pristine white cashmere turtleneck, a subtle designer watch, and a flawless, expensive blowout. She looked exactly like what she was, a sheltered media heiress who had never faced a real consequence in her entire life. As I approached the table, Preston stood up. He pasted on a look of manufactured brotherly concern, playing his role perfectly for the crowded room of wealthy patrons. He reached out as if to help me into the chair. "Take a seat," Blair Preston said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the neighboring tables heard what a supportive older brother he was. "I am so glad you agreed to meet me. I know you are going through a difficult time right now." I ignored his outstretched hand. I carefully lowered myself into the chair opposite them, maneuvering my stiff, braced leg under the table. I rested my crutches against the wall and looked at the two of them. Courtney did not bother to stand or offer a greeting. She took a slow sip of her iced matcha latte, her eyes scanning my heavy medical boot and standard-issue hospital crutches with visible distaste. She looked at me the way one might look at a piece of trash that had blown onto a manicured lawn. "Let us skip the performance, Preston," I said, keeping my voice low and entirely devoid of emotion. "Why did you demand this meeting?" Preston sighed heavily, shaking his head with a perfectly practiced look of disappointment. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He placed it carefully on the center of the table. "I am trying to help you, Blair," Preston said, folding his hands together. "You are my sister. It breaks my heart to see you struggling like this. Mom told me you are having a mental breakdown. I know your low-level accounting job does not offer the best health insurance. I want to make sure you are taken care of after that unfortunate mugging in the alley." He slid the envelope across the polished wood table toward me. "Inside is a check for $20,000. Preston stated, a smug layer of arrogance bleeding through his fake sympathy. "It is more than enough to cover your medical deductibles and buy you a decent car, so you do not have to rely on public transit with that leg. All I ask in return is that you sign the attached document." I did not touch the envelope. "What is the document?" "It is a standard non-disclosure agreement," he replied casually, leaning back against the leather booth. "It just legally binds you to stop spreading malicious lies about my business, my personal life, and my marital status. It also stipulates that you will not discuss the incident in the alley with anyone, including the police or the press. You sign the paper, you take the money, and we all move on with our lives." He was sweating. It was barely noticeable, just a slight sheen on his forehead, but I could see the absolute desperation hiding behind his arrogant smirk. He knew his fraudulent divorce filing had failed. He knew he was weeks away from complete financial ruin. He was trying to buy my silence before his entire house of cards collapsed onto his upcoming wedding. Before I could respond, Courtney set her glass down with a sharp clink. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her expression hardening into a condescending sneer. Take the charity, Blair, Courtney said, her voice dripping with unearned superiority. Preston is being incredibly generous considering how you have been acting. We know you are just a low-level corporate drone. We know you are jealous of what he has built. You are embarrassing yourself by trying to cause drama right before our wedding. Take the money, fix your leg, and leave us alone. I looked at Courtney. She was so blindly infatuated with the illusion of Preston that she had no idea she was sitting next to a man who was actively committing federal crimes. She had no idea he was already married. She had no idea his company was effectively owned by the woman she just called a corporate drone. I kept my face entirely impassive. I reached out and opened the white envelope. I pulled out the legal document first. It was a poorly drafted non-disclosure agreement, completely unenforceable because it explicitly attempted to cover up felony assault and bigamy. Preston had clearly printed it off the internet to avoid paying a real attorney who would have asked too many questions. Then I pulled out the check. I stared at the rectangular piece of paper. It was made out to me for $20,000. But my eyes did not focus on the amount. My eyes locked immediately onto the top left corner of the check. It did not have Preston's name on it. It did not have his LLC printed on it. The account name printed on the check read, Vanguard Media Holdings. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. Vanguard Media Holdings was the private asset management fund controlled exclusively by Courtney's father. I knew this because I had mapped out their entire corporate structure last night. Preston had not even married Courtney yet, but he had somehow already manipulated his way into securing signatory access to her family's private accounts. He was completely broke, so he was using his future father-in-law's corporate funds to pay hush money to his current wife's sister. It was textbook embezzlement. It was wire fraud. It was a direct, undeniable felony. I did not gasp. I did not panic. I did not throw the coffee in his face. I simply looked up at Preston. He was holding out an expensive gold-plated fountain pen, expecting me to fight him, expecting me to cry or argue. I took the pen from his hand. I smoothed the completely useless non-disclosure agreement flat against the table. With a fluid, practiced motion, I signed my name on the dotted line. I handed the paper back to Preston. He blinked clearly, shocked by how easily I had surrendered. A massive, victorious grin spread across his face as he snatched the signed document and tucked it safely into his jacket. I picked up the $20,000 check, folded it neatly, exactly in half, and slid it into the breast pocket of my blazer. I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up, grabbing my aluminum crutches. I stood over them, looking down at the happy couple. Courtney was smiling, clearly pleased that the annoying poor sister had finally been bought off and silenced. I leaned forward, closing the distance between Preston and myself. I kept my voice so quiet that only he could hear the absolute venom in my words. "You think you are a real estate mogul?" I whispered, watching the smug smile slowly melt off his face. "His holding company is drowning in $4 million of toxic debt, Courtney. And I just bought his debt. I own his company now." Preston froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His eyes darted to the pocket where I had just placed the check. I patted my blazer pocket right over the folded piece of paper. "Thanks for the felony evidence, Preston," I said perfectly clearly. I turned around, adjusted my crutches, and walked out of the cafe, leaving them sitting in absolute silence. The elevator doors slid open silently, depositing me directly into the private foyer of my Gold Coast penthouse. I maneuvered my crutches over the threshold, the heavy medical boot dragging slightly against the imported Brazilian hardwood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of Lake Michigan. My family thought I lived in a cramped, budget apartment in the suburbs. I had never bothered to correct their assumptions. I let them believe I was exactly the mediocre, low-level employee they wanted me to be, because it made my actual life so much more peaceful. I preferred the shadows. I preferred being underestimated. Simone was already sitting at my massive marble dining table, which we had completely repurposed into a war room. 3 high-resolution monitors were glowing with financial charts, banking records, and encrypted federal databases. She looked up as I hobbled into the room, noting the tight expression on my face. I reached into my blazer, pulled out the $20,000 check, and tossed it onto the marble surface right in front of her. "Run the routing numbers," I said, leaning my crutches against the wall and carefully lowering myself into an ergonomic chair. Preston just tried to buy my silence. He wants me to sign a non-disclosure agreement about his fake divorce and the assault. Simone picked up the check, her sharp eyes scanning the printed text. A dark, dangerous smile spread across her face as she read the account holder information. Vanguard Media Holdings. She did not even need to run the numbers to know exactly what we were looking at. "He is stealing from his future father-in-law," Simone said, typing the account details into her secure IRS terminal to verify the paper trail. "He does not have legal access to this wealth fund yet. The marriage has not happened. The joint accounts have not been formalized. He must have forged Courtney's signature or bribed a wealth manager to siphon this cash." The monitors beeped in rapid succession as Simone mapped the money flow. The data confirmed everything. Preston was desperate. He was draining Courtney Family Trust to pay off his immediate toxic liabilities and using the stolen cash to hand out hush money. "He just handed us the exact rope we need to hang him," Simone stated, taking a photograph of the check and uploading it directly to her federal case file. This elevates his situation from standard civil fraud to grand larceny and federal wire fraud. Before I could celebrate the victory, my work phone began to vibrate violently on the table. The caller ID flashed the name of my firm Director of Human Resources, Greg. It was late in the afternoon, well past standard corporate hours. I tapped the screen to answer, putting the call on speaker. "Blair," Greg said, his voice completely devoid of its usual friendly warmth. "I need you in the office immediately. We have a massive crisis on our hands and I am being forced to initiate an emergency review board." I shared a look with Simone. "I am currently on medical leave, Greg. What kind of crisis requires an emergency review board?" "We received a barrage of phone calls today," Greg explained, his tone tight and uncomfortable. "A woman claiming to be your mother, Beverly, contacted the managing partners directly. She sent over a dozen frantic, weeping voicemails. She claimed you are suffering from a severe narcotic addiction. She told the board that you smashed your own knee with a hammer during a drug-induced psychosis to extort money from your family." My blood ran cold. Beverly had gone nuclear. She realized she could not control me with threats of eviction, so she was actively trying to destroy my professional credibility. In the high-stakes world of corporate liquidations, reputation was everything. If the board believed I was an unstable addict, I would lose my security clearances, my client access, and my career. "She claimed you are mentally unfit to handle sensitive corporate accounts." Greg continued, sounding genuinely apologetic, but bound by corporate policy. "Blair, the partners are terrified of the liability. I am being ordered to place you on unpaid administrative leave, pending a full investigation into your mental state and substance abuse allegations. You need to come in and surrender your company hardware." I did not raise my voice. I did not panic. I looked at Simone, who was already packing the forged check and her badge into her leather briefcase. "I will be there in 20 minutes, Greg," I said, and ended the call. Beverly thought she could cut off my income and isolate me. She thought she could force me to crawl back to her on my hands and knees, begging for mercy. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you corner a predator. Simone drove us to the financial district, her federal vehicle bypassing the evening traffic. I refused the wheelchair the building security offered, relying strictly on my crutches as I dragged myself into the glass-walled elevator and rode up to the executive floor. Greg was waiting in the main glass conference room. 2 senior partners were sitting beside him, looking grim and uncomfortable. They had a stack of disciplinary paperwork resting on the mahogany table, ready for my signature. I stepped into the room, my heavy medical boot thudding against the floor. But before Greg could even open his mouth to read the suspension mandate, Simone walked in right behind me. She did not wait for an invitation. Simone walked straight to the head of the conference table. The senior partners looked up, startled by the commanding presence of a woman they had never seen before. Simone reached into her blazer and dropped her gold IRS special agent badge directly onto the center of the table. The heavy metal clattered loudly against the wood. Next, she pulled a thick sealed document from her briefcase and slammed it down right on top of the disciplinary paperwork Greg had prepared. The bold red stamp on the envelope read, "Federal Subpoena. Nobody speaks until I am finished." Simone commanded, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. The senior partners froze, their eyes locked on the federal badge. "My name is Special Agent Simone. I operate out of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." Blair is not a drug addict, and she did not shatter her own knee. She is currently acting as a highly classified, protected federal informant in a multi-million-dollar tax fraud and embezzlement case targeting Preston holding companies. Greg swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the subpoena to my impassive face. "We had no idea," Greg stammered, raising his hands defensively. "Her mother called us and said," "Her mother is a co-conspirator attempting to obstruct a federal investigation through workplace retaliation and slander," Simone interrupted, leaning over the table to stare Greg directly in the eyes. "Blair is vital to the United States Treasury. If you attempt to suspend her, if you restrict her access to the financial terminals, or if you touch her job in any capacity, I will personally view it as obstruction of a federal investigation." Simone tapped a perfectly manicured finger against the subpoena. "And I promise you, gentlemen, if you touch her job, I will bring an entire team of federal auditors into this building, and we will audit this entire firm down to the last paperclip." The silence in the conference room was absolute. The senior partners looked at the badge, looked at the subpoena, and then looked at me with a newfound expression of absolute terror and respect. Greg slowly reached out and slid the disciplinary paperwork off the table, dropping it directly into the shredder bin beside his chair. "We completely understand," Special Agent Greg said, his voice shaking slightly. "Blair is an exemplary employee. Her position is entirely secure. We will block all future calls from Beverly immediately." I adjusted my grip on my crutches, offering Greg a polite, chilling smile. "Thank you, Greg. Now, if you will excuse me, I have federal business to attend to." 48 hours after Simone walked out of my human resources department, leaving my corporate executives trembling in her wake, I prepared for the next item on my agenda. Preston and Courtney were celebrating their upcoming nuptials with a lavish high society event. It was technically a bridal shower, but in Chicago's elite circles, the final hour always transitioned into a co-ed champagne reception, where the groom, the fathers, and the wealthy investors arrived to toast the couple. It was the perfect stage. I arrived at the exclusive Heritage Country Club just as the valet line was filling up with imported sports cars and black luxury SUVs. I had ditched the standard-issue aluminum hospital crutches for a pair of sleek black carbon fiber forearm crutches that I had overnighted to my penthouse. They were quiet, elegant, and ruthless. My wardrobe required equal precision. I chose a custom-tailored emerald green silk gown with structured shoulders and a dramatic plunging neckline. The dress featured a severe thigh-high slit on the right side, which perfectly accommodated my heavy black medical boot, making it look less like a medical necessity and more like a deliberate avant-garde fashion statement. I swept my dark hair back into a flawless severe chignon. I wore zero jewelry. I did not need diamonds to command a room. I pushed through the heavy oak double doors and stepped into the grand ballroom. The space was a nauseating explosion of wealth. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the crystal chandeliers. A massive ice sculpture of two swans sat beside a towering champagne fountain. A live string quartet was playing a classical rendition of a pop song in the corner. In the center of the room stood Courtney, wearing a fluffy, excessively beaded white tulle dress that made her look like an overgrown cupcake. Preston stood beside her, holding a crystal flute of champagne, looking incredibly pleased with himself. The heavy thud of my medical boot and the sharp click of my carbon fiber crutches cut through the gentle hum of the ballroom. The string quartet faltered on a note. Heads began to turn. Conversations died in my wake as the sea of pastel-wearing socialites parted to let me through. I kept my chin perfectly level, my eyes fixed entirely on the center of the room. The emerald green silk flowed behind me like liquid glass, completely eclipsing Courtney's frantic, ruffled bridal aura. Preston saw me first. The champagne glass in his hand tilted, spilling expensive liquid over his polished wingtip shoes. His jaw dropped. Then Beverly spotted me. My mother was standing near the gift table holding a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. When her eyes locked onto my emerald dress and medical boot, her fake society smile vanished. Her face flushed a violent mottled red. She slammed the silver tray down onto a linen-covered table, knocking over 2 glasses of water, and began marching toward me with the sheer velocity of a heat-seeking missile. "Security!" Beverly shrieked, her voice shattering the refined atmosphere of the country club. "Someone get security in here right now! Remove this woman!" 2 burly men in dark suits immediately uncrossed their arms and began walking briskly toward my side of the ballroom. I did not stop moving. I kept a steady, rhythmic pace on my crutches, forcing Beverly to intercept me in the very center of the room, right in front of the massive ice sculpture. "You deranged, jealous little addict!" Beverly hissed, her voice vibrating with a hysterical pitch that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She turned wildly to the crowd, addressing the wealthy onlookers. "She is sick. She is my daughter, but she is deeply sick. She smashed her own knee in a drug-induced stupor to extort money from us. She is in a psychosis. Get her out of here." The 2 security guards reached out to grab my arms. I stopped. I balanced my weight entirely on my good leg, lifted my right crutch, and planted the rubber tip firmly against the chest of the closest guard. I did not push him. I just held the carbon fiber rod there, establishing a rigid, undeniable boundary. "If you touch me, I will personally ensure this club loses its operating license by Monday morning," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly projected. The guard hesitated, looking at my expensive gown, an absolute lack of fear. He took a half step back. Beverly was practically vibrating with rage. "Preston," Beverly yelled, waving her hands. "Get her out!" Preston rushed forward, his face slick with panic. He grabbed Courtney by the hand, dragging her with him as he tried to form a physical blockade between me and the rest of the room. "Blair, you are leaving?" Preston commanded in a harsh, hushed whisper. "You signed the paperwork. You took the money. You promised to stay away." I ignored my brother completely. My eyes bypassed him and locked onto the man standing just a few feet behind Courtney. Arthur Vanguard. Courtney's father was a titan of Chicago media. He had silver hair, cold, calculating gray eyes, and wore a custom navy suit that cost more than my first car. He did not look angry about the disruption. He looked deeply irritated by the incompetence of the people around him. He took a slow sip of his bourbon and stepped forward easily, brushing past a frantic Beverly. "What exactly is the meaning of this?" Arthur demanded, his deep baritone instantly silencing the remaining whispers in the room. "Who is this woman, and why is she disrupting my daughter's shower?" "Mr. Vanguard." Preston stammered, stepping directly in front of me, desperately trying to block my line of sight. "She is nobody. She is just my troubled sister. She has mental health issues. I am handling it right now." I smoothly sidestepped Preston, bracing my weight on my crutches to stand directly in front of the billionaire media mogul. "Arthur," Y said, greeting him with a polite, razor-sharp smile. "I apologize for the interruption. I really do not plan to stay long. I just needed to drop off a thank you note." I shifted my weight, letting my left crutch rest against my side so I could reach into my emerald clutch. I pulled out a folded high-resolution bank printout. It was the heavily encrypted financial trace Simone had pulled from the federal database, officially stamped and certified. I held the document out. Arthur raised a skeptical eyebrow but took the paper from my hand. He unfolded it slowly. I projected my voice so every single wealthy socialite, investor, and country club member in the ballroom could hear me perfectly. "I just wanted to thank you for paying my $20,000 medical bill out of your corporate media account," I announced, maintaining cheerful, unwavering eye contact with Arthur. "Your future son-in-law was so desperate to buy my silence regarding his other legal wife that he wrote me a hush money check directly from Vanguard Media Holdings. Preston is incredibly generous with your money." The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Arthur Vanguard stared at the certified bank printout. His eyes traced the routing numbers, the corporate account header, and Preston's unauthorized signature. The realization of what he was looking at hit him like a freight train. The skin around his collar flushed a deep, violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his silk tie. Arthur slowly lowered the paper. He turned his head, his cold gray eyes locking onto Preston. Preston was shaking. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Courtney stared at her father, completely clueless. "Daddy, what is she talking about?" Arthur crumpled the printout in his fist. His voice was a lethal, terrifying whisper that carried across the dead silent room. "My office. Right now." 48 hours after Arthur Vanguard dragged his future son-in-law out of the country club ballroom by his bespoke lapels, I sat at my dual-monitor workstation at the restructuring firm. The fallout in Chicago's elite financial circles had been swift, brutal, and incredibly quiet. Word through the corporate grapevine confirmed that Arthur had completely severed Preston's access to the Vanguard media accounts. Preston was cornered. He was desperately shifting whatever pennies he had left in his own failing holding company to float his collapsing lifestyle, but it was like using a bucket to bail out the Titanic. It was time to cut the final string. I initiated the corporate asset freeze. As the primary debt holder of his $4 million mezzanine loan, my firm possessed the absolute legal right to lock down his operational accounts the very second he missed his balloon payment. That payment had been due at noon. It was now exactly 1 minute past the deadline. I typed in my executive authorization code. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation banner. Across the city, Preston's corporate credit cards, his checking accounts, his payroll lines, and his personal equity lines instantly dropped to zero. He could not buy a cup of coffee, let alone fund a high society wedding. The empire he built on lies and stolen funds was officially dead. I logged out of my terminal, packed my laptop into my leather tote, and grabbed my carbon fiber crutches. It was late by the time my private car service dropped me off inside the secured subterranean parking garage of my apartment building. The expansive concrete cavern was silent, bathed in the harsh flickering glow of fluorescent security lights. My family still believed I lived in a cramped budget apartment in the suburbs, so I knew Preston had to have gone through extraordinary lengths to track me to this luxury high-rise. The heavy thud of my medical boot and the sharp click of my crutches echoed loudly off the concrete walls as I made my way toward the private resident elevator. I was 50 feet away from the glass doors when a shadow detached itself from the concrete pillar blocking my parking bay. I stopped. Every instinct in my body went on high alert. Preston stepped into the dim light. He looked absolutely deranged. His custom-tailored suit was violently rumpled and stained with spilled coffee. His silk tie was pulled loose, hanging unevenly around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, darting wildly around the empty garage, and his hands were curled into tight, trembling fists. He had clearly bribed or tailgated a delivery driver to bypass the main security gate. "You locked me out!" Preston snarled, his voice echoing off the low ceiling. He took a heavy, menacing step toward me. My black card was declined at a client dinner. My corporate accounts are frozen. The bank told me a restructuring firm seized my assets. I adjusted my grip on my crutches, bracing my weight heavily on my good leg. "You defaulted on $4 million of toxic debt, Preston. That is exactly how the financial sector works." Arthur threw me out of his office, Preston shouted, pacing frantically in a tight circle like a rabid dog. He froze the media fund. "Courtney is not returning my calls. The wedding planner is demanding her final payment tomorrow, and I cannot even buy a tank of gas. You did this to me. You ruined everything." "I did not ruin anything," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You built a fake life on stolen money. You forged legal documents. You committed federal wire fraud. I am just the person holding the mirror up to your absolute incompetence." Preston stopped pacing. He turned to face me, his chest heaving. The sheer, unadulterated hatred radiating from him was palpable. He had always been a narcissist, But now he was a cornered animal facing the complete destruction of his fabricated identity. He blamed me for his failures, just like Beverly had always taught him to do. "I will not let you take this from me," Preston whispered, his voice dropping into a lethal, terrifying register. He closed the distance between us in 3 long, aggressive strides. "I am the golden boy. I am the one who brings this family into the elite. You are nothing. You are a bitter, crippled little drone, and you need to learn your place." He lunged at me. He raised his right fist high above his head, aiming directly for my face. I could see the absolute violence in his eyes. He fully intended to shatter my jaw, the exact same way he had shattered my knee in that alley. "I will kill you before I let you ruin my wedding," Preston screamed. I did not flinch. I did not even step back. A sharp, violent crackle of electricity ripped through the silent garage. A brilliant blue spark illuminated the shadows to my right. Preston froze mid-strike. Simone stepped out from behind the adjacent concrete pillar. She wore her dark navy suit, her gold federal badge clipped prominently to her belt, and a lethal, merciless smile on her face. In her right hand, she held a high-grade law enforcement taser. The stun gun buzzed menacingly as she pressed the metal prongs directly against the side of Preston's neck. "Hello, husband," Simone said. Her voice was smooth, quiet, and absolutely terrifying. Preston stood completely paralyzed. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His raised fist trembled violently in the air before slowly dropping to his side. He stared at Simone in absolute horror, his eyes wide with the realization that his estranged wife was not just standing in Chicago, but holding a deadly weapon to his throat. "Touch my sister-in-law again," Simone whispered, pressing the 50,000-volt metal prongs just a fraction of an inch deeper into his skin, "and I'll fry your nervous system before I lock you in a federal cell." Preston swallowed hard. He looked at the taser, then at Simone, and finally at me. The realization of his complete and utter defeat finally crushed the last remaining ounce of his arrogance. A dark, spreading stain quickly appeared on the front of his tailored gray trousers. He had literally wet himself in sheer terror. Simone let out a sharp, disgusted laugh and pulled the taser back. "Run," she commanded. Preston stumbled backward. He tripped over his own feet, scrambled to regain his balance, and sprinted blindly toward the exit ramp. The sound of his frantic, slapping footsteps echoed through the garage until he disappeared completely into the night. Simone deactivated the stun gun and tucked it neatly into her tactical holster. She turned to me, adjusting her blazer with perfect composure. "Well," Simone said casually, glancing down at the pathetic puddle Preston had left on the concrete floor, "I think it is safe to say the groom is officially getting cold feet." The sharp scent of ozone lingered in the cold air of the parking garage, long after Preston's frantic footsteps faded into the distance. Simone calmly smoothed the lapels of her navy suit, her eyes tracking the dark stain he had left on the concrete floor. We did not say a word to each other as we stepped into the private resident elevator. The heavy metallic doors slid shut, sealing us off from the pathetic display we had just witnessed. We rode in absolute silence up to the penthouse. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still humming through my veins, masking the dull ache in my shattered knee. I maneuvered my carbon fiber crutches across the Brazilian hardwood floor and settled back into my ergonomic chair at the marble dining table. The 3 high-resolution monitors of our makeshift war room were still glowing, casting a sharp blue light across the room. Simone dropped her leather briefcase onto the table and pulled out the manila folder containing Preston's rejected divorce filing. She spread the official state documents out across the marble surface. "He is unraveling fast," Simone stated, taking a seat beside me. "But a desperate man is a dangerous man. We have his corporate accounts frozen and his embezzlement from the Vanguard Media Fund fully documented. Now we need to lock down the criminal fraud angle on his marital status before he tries to flee the jurisdiction." I leaned forward, studying the paperwork. He filed this petition for dissolution of marriage 3 months ago. He forged your signature perfectly, but the county clerk rejected it because the notary's stamp was flagged as fraudulent. Exactly, Simone said, tapping the blue ink stamp at the bottom of the page. He bought a cheap expired notary seal online to bypass the legal requirement of having me physically present. But a stamp alone does not notarize a document. A human being has to physically sign their name over the seal to attest that they witnessed the signatures. Preston is arrogant, but he is not stupid enough to forge both my name and a fake notary signature in his own handwriting. The state handwriting analysts would catch that instantly. He had an accomplice. I pulled the official document closer, squinting at the messy, illegible scrawl scrawled aggressively across the blue notary stamp. The ink was heavily smudged, as if the person signing it had been rushing or deliberately trying to obscure their identity. It was a chaotic tangle of sharp angles and heavy loops. "We need to know who held the pen," Simone said, her voice dropping into her authoritative federal agent register. "Whoever signed this document committed a state felony by impersonating an officer of the court and facilitating federal fraud. If we identify the accomplice, I can leverage them to testify against Preston." My work terminal pinged with a harsh electronic chime. I glanced away from the forged document. My personal cell phone, resting next to my keyboard, lit up with a new text message. The caller ID flashed Beverly. I let out a dry, humorless breath. I picked up the phone and opened the message. My mother had clearly recovered from her public meltdown at the country club bridal shower and was back to her usual brand of toxic, delusional arrogance. I read the text aloud so Simone could hear it. "Your petty little stunt at the country club failed, Blair. Arthur Vanguard was upset about the disruption, but Preston explained everything. Preston just secured a brand new $1 million bridge loan from a private lender. The wedding is moving forward exactly as planned. You are a bitter, jealous failure, and you are going to die completely alone in whatever miserable apartment you are hiding in. Stay away from my family." Simone let out a sharp laugh. "A $1 million bridge loan. He is borrowing money from loan sharks now because you froze his legitimate credit lines. He is digging his own grave with a backhoe." "Beverly actually believes him," I said, tossing the phone back onto the marble table. "She genuinely believes he is a misunderstood genius victimized by his jealous sister. She has zero concept of the financial trap closing around her own neck. She co-signed his toxic debt. She put up her own estate as collateral. She is defending the man who is actively bankrupting her." I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. "Let us find out who helped her golden boy commit bigamy." I activated my proprietary corporate restructuring software. The program was designed to analyze deeply buried financial anomalies, but it also contained a high-grade forensic imaging tool used to verify contested signatures on massive corporate mergers. I placed the physical divorce document onto the high-speed scanner sitting at the edge of the table. The machine hummed instantly, rendering a perfect ultra-high-definition digital copy onto my center monitor. I isolated the smudged, chaotic signature scrawled across the fake notary stamp. I applied a digital filter, stripping away the background noise of the blue ink seal. Then I initiated a sequence of algorithmic keystrokes to reverse the smudging, isolating the exact pen strokes, the pressure points, and the unique curvature of the letters. The chaotic mess of ink slowly began to untangle itself on the screen. The sharp angles softened into distinct, recognizable letters. The heavy loops clarified into a very specific, aggressive, cursive style. I stared at the newly sharpened image glowing in the center of my screen. My hands froze over the keyboard. I blinked once, then twice. A sudden sharp bark of laughter escaped my throat. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a full, unrestrained burst of absolute shock and profound poetic justice. I leaned back in my chair, laughing so hard my shattered knee flared with pain, but I did not care. Simone looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it? What did you find?" I pointed a trembling finger at the massive glowing signature on the monitor. The illegal notary who stamped Preston's fake divorce papers was not a stranger. It was not a bribed associate or a shady real estate contact. The bold, arrogant handwriting staring back at us was entirely unmistakable. I had seen that exact signature on birthday cards, report cards, and passive-aggressive post-it notes my entire life. It was Beverly. I wiped a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye and looked at Simone. The federal agent was staring at the screen, her jaw slightly slack, as the absolute stupidity of the situation washed over her. My mother did not just co-sign his loans. I said, a massive, victorious smile breaking across my face. She illegally notarized his fake divorce. She committed a state felony to help her golden boy commit bigamy. Thanks for the felony evidence, Mother. The morning sun reflecting off the Chicago skyline usually brought a sense of absolute peace to my corner office on the 42nd floor. Today, it simply illuminated the battlefield. I sat behind my massive mahogany desk reviewing the digital forensic scans of the forged divorce papers. Simone was already leveraging her federal contacts to expedite the arrest warrants. Preston was drowning in his own frozen assets, but a cornered animal is nothing compared to the mother who birthed it. The heavy glass door to my executive suite swung open without a knock. My assistant Sarah hovered in the doorway, looking incredibly flustered, but before she could utter a word of apology, Beverly pushed violently past her. My mother froze the exact moment her designer heels sank into my plush wool carpet. She had expected a miserable little cubicle. She had expected to find a low-level corporate drone hiding in a basement, surrounded by the mediocrity she always insisted was my destiny. Instead, she was staring at an expansive sunlit corner suite, adorned with custom modern art, a private seating area, and a panoramic, unobstructed view of Lake Michigan. I waved Sarah off with a subtle nod. The heavy glass door clicked shut, leaving us entirely alone in the quiet, climate-controlled room. Beverly darted her eyes frantically around the office, silently tallying the cost of the leather furniture, the imported wood, and the sheer, undeniable executive power the space commanded. Her face flushed a toxic mottled shade of red, driven by a cocktail of profound confusion and deep, bitter envy. But Beverly had decades of practice twisting reality to suit her fragile ego. She smoothed the front of her tweed jacket, lifted her chin, and marched over to the guest chair, seating herself without waiting for an invitation. So Beverly began, her voice tight, but attempting a conversational breeze. "This is where you have been hiding. It is a bit flashy for a standard liquidator, do you not think?" I did not offer her a coffee. I simply folded my hands on my desk, keeping my posture perfectly still. "You are trespassing, Mother. What do you want?" Beverly sighed, adopting the performative, long-suffering tone of a martyr forced to deal with an ungrateful child. She leaned forward, resting her hands on her purse. She claimed Preston had hit a minor snag. His new bridge loan was temporarily tied up in bureaucratic red tape. The wedding planner was threatening to cancel the country club reservation by the end of the business day. The caterers were demanding immediate cash wire transfers. The Vanguard media money was entirely gone, and Arthur was refusing to answer their calls. "I am here to offer you a truce," Blair Beverly announced, her tone implying she was bestowing a massive, benevolent gift upon a peasant. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and dropped it directly onto my desk. "I know about your emergency medical trust fund," Beverly stated, her eyes locking onto mine with predatory focus. "The $500,000 your grandfather set aside for you before he died. I know it matures this year, and I know you have not touched a single cent of it." I stared at her, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. She wanted the fund designed to protect me in a medical emergency. She wanted it to pay for a caterer. "You want me to liquidate my medical trust to fund Preston's fraudulent wedding," I said, making sure to enunciate every single word. Beverly smiled, a sickeningly sweet, terrifyingly hollow expression. "I want you to be part of this family again. If you sign this release form and transfer the funds to Preston today, all is forgiven. We will forget the disruption at the bridal shower. Courtney actually needs another bridesmaid because one of her sorority sisters dropped out. You can stand up there at the altar with us. It is the only way you will ever be part of this family again, Blair. You can finally belong." I glanced down at my heavy medical boot, the direct result of her golden boy paying thugs to shatter my knee with a crowbar, and then looked back up at her face. "And if I decline this generous offer?" Beverly dropped the sweet facade instantly. Her smile vanished, replaced by a vicious, calculating glare. "Then I go straight to your managing partners," Beverly threatened, her voice dropping to a harsh hiss. "I go to the police. I will tell everyone you used your corporate access to steal that money from Preston's accounts. I will say you embezzled from your own family to fund this little corporate fantasy life of yours. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will tell everyone you are a thief, and I will personally see to it that you rot in a jail cell." This was it, the absolute peak of her unchecked delusion. She genuinely believed she held all the cards. She genuinely believed I was the weak, terrified girl she had spent 3 decades breaking down. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, subtly sliding my left wrist forward. With my right index finger, I casually tapped the face of my smartwatch twice. The tiny recording application illuminated instantly in the background, syncing a live audio feed directly to Simone's encrypted federal IRS server. I let my shoulders slump forward, forcing my voice to tremble just a fraction to mimic submission and fear. "I am sorry, Mother," I said, perfectly pitching my tone to sound defeated. "Could you repeat that? You want me to sign over $500,000 of my medical trust to pay for Preston's wedding, or you will frame me for corporate theft?" "You are damn right I will," Beverly snapped, leaning aggressively over the mahogany desk, her eyes wide with manic arrogance. "You owe us. You have always owed this family." I kept my eyes fixed on the desk, playing the role of the broken daughter. "Just like I owed you my silence when Preston hired those men to smash my knee in that alley. Did you help him plan the assault too? Is that why you illegally signed Simone's notary stamp on the fake divorce papers? Did you forge a federal document to cover up the attack and force this bigamy?" Beverly laughed. It was a sharp, triumphant sound that echoed loudly across the spacious office. She thought she had won. She thought I was finally surrendering to the natural order of the universe, where she and Preston reigned supreme and untouchable. "Of course I signed the stamp," Beverly declared proudly, practically bragging about her own felony. "Preston was too scared to do it himself. Someone had to take charge and ensure his future with Courtney Vanguard was totally secure. And as for your knee, you brought that on yourself. You threatened to ruin his engagement. You needed to be taught a permanent lesson about loyalty. We did what we had to do to protect the family legacy, and if I had to, I would orchestrate the attack all over again." Beverly pulled a gold pen from her purse and slammed it down on top of the release form. "Now pick up the pen and sign the damn trust release before I lose my patience." I looked at the gold pen resting on the paperwork. Then I looked down at my left wrist. I tapped the screen of my smartwatch one final time, locking the audio file and officially logging it into federal evidence. I slowly sat up straight, squaring my shoulders as the false fear completely vanished from my face. I looked directly into my mother's eyes with a cold, lethal calm. "Thank you for confirming that, Mother." Beverly scoffed, entirely oblivious to the lethal finality in my voice. She genuinely believed my compliance was a permanent, unchangeable law of nature. She snatched her designer handbag off the polished mahogany desk, turned on her heel, and marched out of my corner suite. The heavy glass door swung shut behind her, sealing her fate. I immediately opened a secure channel to Simone. "We have the confession," I said, staring at the encrypted audio file uploading to the federal server. "Proceed to phase 2. Loud and clear, Simone replied, her voice crisp over the speaker. "Bring him down." I terminated the call and turned my attention to the glowing dual monitors on my desk. The grace period for Preston's $4 million mezzanine loan had officially expired at noon. As the senior liquidator managing his defaulted toxic debt, I possessed the unilateral ironclad legal authority to execute a total corporate forfeiture. I opened the master ledger for his luxury real estate brokerage. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I executed the final protocols. Initiate asset freeze confirmed. Transfer intellectual property rights confirmed. Seize commercial real estate holdings confirmed. I typed in my executive authorization code, digitally stamped the asset forfeiture orders, and dispatched the physical seizure team. The liquidation. Preston's luxury real estate brokerage occupied a prime ground floor retail space in the prestigious Gold Coast district. It was designed to intimidate clients with the illusion of generational wealth, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass panels, imported Italian marble floors, and massive digital displays showcasing multi-million-dollar properties. I arrived 20 minutes ahead of him, riding in the back of a black company SUV accompanied by my firm's lead security detail. We did not bother knocking. We possessed the absolute legal right of entry. My team moved with ruthless practiced efficiency. They ordered Preston's panicked reception staff to pack their personal belongings and vacate the premises immediately. Within 10 minutes, the lavish marble lobby was entirely empty. My technicians killed the power to the digital listing displays, plunging the opulent showroom into absolute darkness. Two burly contractors approached the heavy glass double doors. They looped a thick industrial-grade steel chain tightly through the brushed nickel handles and snapped a massive brass padlock into place. Finally, they slapped a large bright red sticker directly onto the center of the glass. Property seized pursuant to federal and state liquidation orders. Right below the glaring warning was the unmistakable bold black logo of my restructuring firm. I stood on the sidewalk, bracing my weight heavily on my carbon fiber crutches. The cold Chicago wind whipped at the hem of my emerald coat. I waited in the silence, watching the street corner until Preston's leased Maserati pulled up to the curb. He stepped out of the vehicle, a forced, arrogant smile plastered on his face, holding a venti iced coffee in his right hand. He was wearing another custom-tailored suit, blissfully unaware that he was walking directly into a financial graveyard. His smile faltered the exact moment he noticed the darkened interior of his brokerage. He squinted against the morning glare, taking in the deserted reception desk. Then his eyes dropped to the thick steel chain wrapping the door handles. Finally, he saw the red seizure notice and my company's logo. The plastic cup slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the pavement, splashing brown liquid and ice across his polished Italian loafers. "What is this?" Preston stammered, rushing frantically to the doors. He grabbed the heavy steel chain, rattling it violently against the glass panels. "Open the door. You cannot do this. This is my property." "It was your property." "Preston," I said, stepping out from the shadow of my company SUV. He whipped around, his face pale and slick with a sudden, terrified sweat. "Blair, what did you do? You cannot seize my physical office. The bridge loan is coming through today. I told Mother to tell you." "The bridge loan fell through 40 minutes ago when the private lender was officially notified of your pending federal wire fraud investigation," I replied smoothly. "You defaulted on the mezzanine debt. My firm now owns this building, your client list, your intellectual property, and every single piece of furniture inside that lobby. I will kill you before I let you ruin my wedding." Preston screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as he lunged forward, raising his fists in a blind rage. My security detail immediately stepped between us, crossing their thick arms and staring him down. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. He was a coward at his core. He only attacked when he held the absolute advantage or the element of surprise against a weaker target. "You have absolutely nothing left," I stated, staring directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. "Go home, Preston." The desperate flight. Preston backed away, his chest heaving with erratic, terrified breaths. He spun around, sprinted back to his Maserati, and threw himself into the driver's seat. He slammed the heavy door, locking it instantly. Through the tinted glass, I watched him scramble like a trapped rat. He ripped his encrypted laptop out of his leather briefcase and shoved it onto the passenger seat. He flipped open the screen, his hands shaking violently as his fingers battered the keyboard. He was panicking. He realized the legitimate walls had completely closed in, and he was resorting to his absolute last line of defense. He was attempting to wire the very last of his hidden illicit cash reserves, money he had likely siphoned and stashed specifically for emergencies, directly to an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The Federal Intercept, 3 miles away, sitting at her high-clearance desk deep inside the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. Special Agent Simone watched a blaring red alert flash across her primary monitor. Her screens were a complex matrix of cascading financial data, all linked directly to Preston's social security number and corporate tax IDs. The federal tracking software had instantly flagged an unauthorized attempt to bypass domestic banking protocols. Simone leaned forward, her sharp eyes tracking the digital routing numbers scrolling across the screen. Preston was trying to move $800,000 through a shell corporation routing out of Delaware, aimed directly at an offshore tax haven. He was desperately trying to fund a getaway. Simone typed a rapid, precise sequence of override commands into her terminal. She navigated to the pending transaction interface. She did not just block the transfer, she actively seized the hidden funds, rerouting the entire $800,000 directly into a secure holding account controlled by the United States Treasury Department. She moved her mouse and firmly clicked the button marked Decline and Seize. The red alert on her screen instantly shifted to a solid verified green. Next, she opened the Federal Customs and Border Protection database. She keyed in Preston's full legal name, his date of birth, and his passport number. She bypassed the standard warnings and selected the highest level flight restriction available for subjects under active criminal investigation. A final confirmation prompt appeared on the screen. Simone hit enter without a second of hesitation. Wire fraud detected. Simone stated to the empty room, a sharp, satisfied smile crossing her face as she finalized the lockdown. He isn't flying anywhere for a honeymoon. The crystal chandeliers of the Vanguard Estate ballroom cast a warm golden glow over the 50 guests assembled for the rehearsal dinner. It was a staggering display of Chicago elite society. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of vintage champagne and caviar, stepping smoothly around floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. Sitting at the head table, Preston looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. He was trying desperately to play the role of the triumphant groom, but the cracks were rapidly turning into chasms. A thick sheen of sweat coated his forehead, catching the light every time he turned to smile at his oblivious bride. He kept shifting his weight compulsively, checking his phone under the heavy linen tablecloth. He knew his brokerage doors were padlocked. He knew his offshore wire transfer had vanished into a federal holding account. He knew his passport was flagged. He was a cornered animal wearing a custom Italian tuxedo, praying that marrying Courtney Vanguard tomorrow would somehow miraculously shield him from federal prison. Beverly, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality crashing down around her golden boy, was holding court 2 seats away. She was in her element, wearing a completely inappropriate white silk gown that rivaled the bride. She laughed loudly at a joke Arthur Vanguard made, her eyes glittering with the desperate triumph of a woman who believed she had secured her family's financial salvation. She still thought her threats in my office had paralyzed me. She had no idea her recorded confession was already sitting on a federal prosecutor's desk. I watched the entire spectacle unfold from the shadows of the secondary balcony, standing quietly next to Simone. We were entirely uninvited, wrapped in dark coats blending perfectly into the background of the sprawling estate. Right on schedule, Simone murmured, checking the glowing face of her tactical watch. Down on the main floor, the heavy mahogany double doors swung open. A courier stepped into the ballroom. He was dressed in a crisp, high-end delivery uniform, carrying a flat, beautifully wrapped package. The silver paper gleamed under the chandeliers, tied with an immaculate navy blue silk ribbon. The courier navigated through the maze of tables, walking with absolute purpose directly toward the head table. Conversations slowly died down as guests turned to watch the unexpected delivery. Arthur Vanguard paused mid-sentence, raising a curious eyebrow. The courier stopped precisely in front of Courtney. He bowed his head slightly, placing the silver box directly onto her silver charger plate. "A special delivery for the bride," the courier announced, his voice carrying easily in the suddenly quiet room. He turned on his heel and marched back out the way he came. Beverly immediately leaned over, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. "Oh, Courtney, it must be jewelry," she gushed loudly, ensuring the surrounding tables could hear. "Perhaps a family heirloom from Arthur." "Open it, darling." Preston stared at the silver box. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He reached a shaking hand out, instinctively trying to stop her. Courtney, maybe you should wait until we are in private, he stammered, his voice cracking. It is bad luck to open gifts before the wedding day. Nonsense, Beverly declared, slapping his hand away. Let the girl see her gift. Courtney offered Preston a reassuring, brilliant smile. Do not be silly, Preston. I want to see it now. She reached out and pulled the navy blue ribbon. The silk fell away smoothly. She lifted the silver wrapping paper, revealing a sleek, heavy mahogany frame beneath. The guests leaned in, waiting for the reveal of a diamond necklace or a vintage portrait. Courtney picked up the heavy frame. She turned it around to look at the glass. I watched from the balcony as the blood completely rushed out of Courtney Vanguard's face. Her brilliant smile froze, then slowly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the mahogany frame rattled against the crystal water glasses. Inside the frame, secured behind high-definition museum glass, was a pristine, officially certified state document. It was a marriage certificate. It featured the official raised gold seal of the state, heavily stamped with today's date to verify its current active legal status. The names, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, were Preston Charles and Simone Davis. Tucked neatly into the corner of the frame, resting against the glass, was a thick, cream-colored cardstock note. Courtney reached out with a trembling finger and pulled the note free. She stared at the elegant, cursive handwriting. I knew exactly what it said because Simone and I had written it together in my office just 3 hours ago. He is already taken. The first wife. Preston practically lunged out of his chair, scrambling frantically across the table to grab the frame. Courtney, do not look at that. It is a fake. It is a forgery. He was too late. Courtney Vanguard dropped the note. She looked from the certified active marriage certificate directly into the terrified, lying eyes of the man she was supposed to marry in 12 hours. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. She was not the blushing bride. She was the victim of a massive, calculated bigamy scam. A piercing, absolute scream tore from Courtney's throat. It was a sound of pure devastation and rage that echoed off the vaulted ceilings and shattered the polite, refined silence of the ballroom. She threw the heavy mahogany frame directly at Preston's chest. The glass shattered violently against his tuxedo lapel, raining sharp fragments down onto the pristine white tablecloth. Alder Vanguard shot out of his chair, knocking his seat backward onto the floor. What is the meaning of this? Alder roared, rushing to his daughter's side. Preston threw his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. Alder, please listen to me. It is a setup. My sister is trying to ruin my life. She fabricated these documents. Courtney pointed a shaking, manicured finger at his face. That has a raised state seal, Preston. You are married. You are already married. Beverly jumped up, her face a mask of panicked denial. Courtney, sweetheart, there has to be a mistake. Preston filed the divorce papers months ago. I saw them myself. Simone leaned over the balcony railing, pitching her authoritative federal agent voice to carry perfectly across the chaotic room. Yes, Beverly Simone called out, silencing the entire ballroom instantly. He filed them with a fake notary stamp. A stamp you illegally signed. Every single head in the room snapped upward to look at the balcony. I stepped out of the shadows, resting my hands firmly on the railing. I looked down at my mother, whose face had just gone entirely white, and then at my brother, who looked ready to collapse. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and bigamy, I announced clearly, letting the words sink into the silent room. You really outdid yourself this time, Preston. Alder Vanguard turned slowly to look at Preston. The wealthy patriarch's face was a mask of cold, lethal fury. He did not yell. He did not scream. He simply pulled his cell phone from his pocket. Call security, Alder ordered, staring dead into Preston's eyes. Lock the estate gates. Nobody leaves. Preston stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping on the scattered glass. He was completely out of options, out of money, and out of time. Preston scrambled backward, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping wildly on the shattered glass of the ruined mahogany frame. The cold, lethal fury in Alder Vanguard's eyes was enough to make any rational man surrender. But Preston was not rational. He was a cornered predator, and his survival instincts immediately overrode his panic. He stopped retreating. He stood up straight, aggressively brushing the shards of glass off his tuxedo jacket. The frantic, sweating coward vanished. In his place, Preston summoned the polished, charismatic persona that had fooled the Chicago elite for years. He took a slow, deep breath, arranging his features into a mask of profound, sorrowful exhaustion. He knew his entire future rested on the next 60 seconds. He looked directly at his weeping bride. "Courtney, please look at me. You have to breathe." This is exactly what she wanted. Preston pointed a steady, accusing finger up at the secondary balcony where I stood. He addressed the entire room, his voice echoing with perfectly pitched tragedy. "My sister is deeply clinically unwell. She has suffered from severe paranoid delusions for years. She has been completely obsessed with destroying my life ever since she failed in her own career. This certificate is nothing but a sophisticated psychotic forgery designed to humiliate you, Courtney." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The wealthy guests leaned in the clinking of champagne flutes, completely stopping as they became entirely captivated by the unfolding drama. Beverly did not miss a single beat. Recognizing the lifeline her golden boy had just thrown, she threw herself into the performance of a lifetime. She rushed forward and grabbed Arthur Vanguard by the arm, squeezing out actual genuine tears that ruined her expensive mascara. "Arthur, you must listen to him," Beverly cried, her voice trembling with the manufactured agony of a heartbroken mother. "It is an absolute tragedy. We have tried to get Blair psychiatric help for decades. She is completely delusional. She resents Courtney's beauty and Preston's success. She must have hired a professional criminal to fabricate that state seal just to ruin this beautiful weekend. Please, Arthur, you cannot let a mentally ill woman destroy our family legacy." Courtney looked down at the certified document resting among the shattered glass, her hands shaking as she wiped her cheeks. "But the state seal is raised. It looks so real, Preston. How could she fake a federal document?" "I will have my legal team here in 10 minutes. Preston promised, taking a slow step toward her with his hands raised in surrender. "I will get the district attorney on the phone right now. I will prove to you that this is a complete fabrication born from my sister's sick obsession." Arthur Vanguard held up a single rigid hand. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The waiters froze in place. The string quartet in the corner completely stopped playing. Arthur was not a man driven by emotion. He was a ruthless media mogul driven entirely by public perception, corporate leverage, and market value. A canceled high society wedding of this magnitude would be a massive public relations nightmare. It would cause a media frenzy that could actively tank Vanguard's stock prices by Monday morning. He could not afford to look like a fool in front of his investors. Arthur looked from the weeping Courtney to Preston, his expression calculating and ice-cold. "I despise public scandals," Preston Arthur stated, his voice dangerously low. "The press is already setting up their cameras outside the estate gates for the ceremony tomorrow. I will not have my daughter humiliated on the front page of the Tribune. I am giving you one chance. If you can provide me with irrefutable, legally binding proof by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning that this document is a forgery, the wedding will proceed to save face." Arthur stepped closer, invading Preston's personal space until they were inches apart. "But if you cannot prove your innocence, I will personally see to it that you are buried so deep you will never see daylight again." Preston let out a shaky, triumphant breath. He thought he had won. He thought he had manipulated the situation just enough to secure a window of escape. He had hours to fabricate a story, bribe a clerk, or flee the country entirely. He nodded eagerly, his eyes lighting up with desperate hope. "You will have the proof, Arthur. I swear it on my life. I will make the calls right now." The heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance of the ballroom violently swung open, bypassing the security guards Arthur had just summoned. The sharp, echoing click of sensible heels cut through the heavy silence of the room. Simone strode down the center aisle of the ballroom. She was no longer wearing a dark coat or blending into the shadows. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored federal suit radiating absolute, undeniable authority. The sea of wealthy guests parted immediately, intimidated by the sheer force of her presence. Simone ignored Preston completely. She did not even look at Courtney or acknowledge Beverly's shocked gasp. She walked directly up to the head table and stopped squarely in front of Arthur Vanguard. With a swift, practiced motion, Simone reached into her breast pocket and flipped open a black leather credential case. The heavy gold shield caught the light of the crystal chandeliers flashing brightly for the entire head table to see. "He cannot prove his innocence," Simone stated, her voice ringing out crisp and lethal across the silent ballroom. "Because that marriage certificate is entirely real." Arthur Vanguard stared down at the federal badge, his calculating eyes narrowing as he read the inscription. "I am Special Agent Simone Davis, Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service," Simone announced, stepping closer to the media mogul. "I am also the woman Preston illegally married to commit federal fraud. He cannot prove he is innocent of bigamy, but I can easily prove he has not paid a single cent of federal taxes in 4 years." Preston staggered backward, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock as the very last of his escape routes evaporated in front of his eyes. Simone kept her eyes locked dead on Arthur Vanguard, delivering the final fatal threat. "If you merge your family assets with this criminal tomorrow morning, I will personally flag Vanguard Media. I am opening a full forensic federal audit into your entire media empire." The morning sun rose over the Chicago skyline, casting a harsh, unforgiving light into the bridal suite of the Grand Conservatory. The room, which should have been a sanctuary of joy and anticipation, felt like an active war zone. Discarded silk robes, half-empty champagne flutes, and scattered hairpins littered the floor. Courtney sat entirely rigid in front of a brightly lit vanity mirror. She stared blankly at her own reflection, while 2 frantic makeup artists desperately tried to conceal her swollen red-rimmed eyes with heavy layers of foundation. The rehearsal dinner had been an absolute catastrophe. However, Arthur Vanguard was a man who valued market optics above human emotion. He had ordered the ceremony to proceed purely as a theatrical performance for the press and his shareholders. He privately swore he would rather burn his media empire to the ground than let Preston sign a legal marriage document, but canceling a society wedding 12 hours before the processional would trigger a media frenzy capable of tanking Vanguard stock prices by Monday morning. The show had to go on. Beverly, meanwhile, paced the length of the suite, barking aggressive orders at the catering staff. She was clinging to her delusions with a white-knuckled grip. In her warped mind, the IRS agent was a bluff. The bigamy charge was a simple misunderstanding, and Preston was still destined to inherit the Vanguard throne. She just needed to force everyone down the aisle. The heavy oak door of the suite suddenly swung open. Mr. Sterling, the conservatory's strict and notoriously unforgiving event director, marched into the room. He carried a silver tablet and wore a deeply displeased expression. He dismissed the makeup artists with a sharp wave of his hand, demanding the room be cleared. "We have a critical situation," Sterling announced, his voice devoid of any customer service warmth. "The final $100,000 payment for the venue and catering, which was scheduled to clear this morning from the groom's accounts, has bounced completely." The bank flagged the transfer for insufficient funds and frozen assets. Courtney buried her face in her hands, letting out a muffled sob. Beverly stopped pacing, her face flushing a dark, angry crimson. "That is impossible," Beverly snapped, marching up to the event director. "My son is a highly successful real estate broker. There must be a clerical error at your bank. Run the transaction again." "I have run it 3 times," Sterling replied coldly. "The accounts are locked by federal order. I need an alternative wire transfer immediately. If the balance is not settled in full within the next 10 minutes, I am pulling the plug. I will unplug the microphones, lock the ballroom doors, and inform the paparazzi gathered outside that the Vanguard wedding is canceled due to severe financial insolvency." Beverly felt her chest seize. Social annihilation was her absolute greatest fear. The thought of the Chicago Tribune publishing a headline about her family's bankruptcy was worse than death. She pulled her phone from her designer bag and frantically dialed Preston's number. It went straight to a disconnected voicemail. He was completely unreachable, likely hiding from federal agents or dealing with his own legal nightmare. She quickly pulled up her own banking applications. She tried to initiate a wire transfer, but her legitimate credit lines were entirely exhausted. She had co-signed his toxic loans and drained her liquidity to fund this extravagant lifestyle. The Vanguard family certainly would not step in to pay. Arthur was already furious, and watching them fail would give him immense satisfaction. Beverly retreated to a quiet corner of the suite, her hands shaking violently. She remembered a shadowy, high-risk private equity application Preston had mentioned once when dealing with desperate real estate clients. It was a fast cash platform designed for high-net-worth individuals facing immediate liquidity crises. She downloaded the application and created an account. The terms of the loan were aggressively predatory. The interest rates were astronomical, bordering on extortion. But the approval algorithm was instant provided the borrower offered a tangible debt-free asset as collateral. Beverly did not hesitate. She typed in the property deed information for her sprawling multi-million-dollar suburban estate. It was the only unencumbered asset she had left. She clicked the digital signature box, legally agreeing to the binding contract. She was trading the very roof over her head, her entire financial safety net, just to buy a single day of fake high society glory. The application screen spun a loading wheel. The tension in the suite was palpable. Sterling tapped his luxury watch, clearing his throat to signal that her time was up. Then a sharp, cheerful chime rang out from Beverly's phone. Loan approved. Funds dispersed. Beverly exhaled a massive breath of relief. She turned back to the room with a triumphant, arrogant smile, holding her phone up for the event director to see. "The funds are wired," Beverly declared, smoothing her dress and lifting her chin. "I told you it was a simple misunderstanding. Now get out of here and make sure the champagne is properly chilled. The wedding is moving forward exactly as planned." Miles away, high above the frantic chaos of the wedding venue, my penthouse was an oasis of absolute calm. I sat at my marble dining table sipping a fresh cup of espresso. Simone was seated across from me, reviewing the morning reports from the IRS audit division. My secure work terminal synced directly to my restructuring firm's master server suddenly emitted a sharp, distinct chime. I set my espresso cup down and reached for the wireless mouse. A new high-priority notification flashed across my center monitor. I opened the encrypted file and read the details of the transaction that had just been finalized. A slow, deeply satisfied smile broke across my face. "What is it?" Simone asked, looking up from her federal paperwork. I turned the monitor so she could see the glowing digital contract. Beverly just took out a $100,000 emergency loan from a private equity firm to pay the venue manager. I explained, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. She agreed to an incredibly predatory interest rate and put her entire suburban estate up as the final collateral. Simone raised an eyebrow. "And why does that make you smile?" "Because she was moving too fast to read the holding company's registration details," I said, tapping the screen. She did not realize the private equity firm she just borrowed from is a shell company entirely owned and operated by my corporate restructuring firm. I looked at the digital signature validating the transfer of her property deed. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen perfectly into place. "Thank you for your business, Mother," I whispered to the empty room. "My holding company just bought your house." The afternoon sun filtered through the massive stained glass windows of the Fourth Presbyterian Church, casting fractured prisms of emerald and ruby light across the polished marble floor. The air inside the cavernous sanctuary was thick with the scent of 10,000 imported white gardenias. A renowned string quartet was playing a flawless rendition of Pachelbel Canon in D, the rich notes soaring into the vaulted Gothic arches above. It was the absolute zenith of Chicago high society, a flawless visual display of wealth and power. Standing at the ornate marble altar, Preston felt a profound, intoxicating wave of relief wash over him. He was sweating heavily, his collar feeling suffocatingly tight against his neck, but a triumphant smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. He had actually pulled it off. He had survived the most catastrophic 24 hours of his miserable life. When the venue manager had threatened to pull the plug that morning, Preston thought it was entirely over. But Beverly had stepped in. His fiercely loyal, tragically easily manipulated mother had somehow produced the required $100,000 at the absolute final second. Preston did not care how she secured the funds. He did not care what she had to leverage or sell. All that mattered was that the floral arrangements were in place, the paparazzi were corralled outside behind velvet ropes, and the Vanguard media empire was about to legally merge with his own. He adjusted his custom silk tie, watching the massive oak doors at the end of the aisle. When they swung open, a collective breath caught in the throats of the 500 assembled guests. Courtney Vanguard stepped into the church, leaning heavily on the arm of her father, Arthur. She did not look like a woman in love. She looked like a hostage walking to her own execution. Her face was chalk white under layers of professional makeup, and her eyes were fixed rigidly on the floor. Arthur Vanguard walked beside her with the grim, terrifying stoicism of a military general overseeing a battlefield. He had clearly calculated that moving forward with the ceremony was the only way to mitigate the devastating public relations fallout of last night's rehearsal dinner. He was forcing this union to happen to protect Vanguard's stock, and Preston knew it. That knowledge gave Preston an incredible surge of power. They were trapped by their own wealth. Once that ring was on her finger, he would be completely untouchable. Down in the front pew, Beverly sat practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. She was wearing an aggressively tailored champagne gown, her chin tilted up to ensure the society photographers caught her best angle. She believed her last-minute high-interest loan had saved the family legacy. She genuinely thought she had outmaneuvered the federal agents, outsmarted her ungrateful daughter, and cemented her place in the upper echelon of the city elite. She had absolutely no idea that her pristine suburban estate now legally belonged to my holding company. The string quartet played their final lingering chord. The music faded into a heavy, expectant silence. Courtney reached the altar. She did not look at Preston. She stared blankly at the gold cross resting on the altar behind the priest. Arthur stepped back, taking his place in the front row with a stiff, furious nod to the clergyman. The priest cleared his throat, opening his leather-bound book. His voice resonated deeply through the church, carrying effortlessly over the crowd. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and the face of this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The priest began, his tone solemn and rhythmic. It is an honorable estate, not to be entered into, unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, discreetly, and soberly. Preston kept his eyes locked on Courtney silently, willing her to look up to play her part for the cameras flashing near the side aisles. He just needed 10 more minutes. 10 minutes until the vows were exchanged and the legal documents were signed in the private vestry. The priest looked up from his book, scanning the faces of the wealthy guests in the pews. Into this holy estate, these two persons present come now to be joined. The priest continued, taking a breath before delivering the traditional age-old warning. If any man can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him speak now, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. A suffocating, absolute silence fell over the cathedral. Preston let out a slow, silent exhale through his nose. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. The threat of last night felt like a distant nightmare. He had won. Then a sound like a gunshot echoed through the sanctuary. Bang! The massive solid oak doors at the back of the church violently slammed open, hitting the stone walls with a deafening crash. The sudden explosive noise shocked the entire room. In the corner, the lead cellist of the string quartet jumped in his seat. His bow dragged harshly across the thick strings of his instrument, letting out a loud, horrific screech that cut through the lingering silence like a jagged knife. 500 guests whipped their heads around simultaneously. Beverly gasped, clutching her diamond necklace. Arthur Vanguard stood up straight, his jaw tightening into a ruthless line. Preston gripped the edge of the marble altar so hard, his knuckles turned completely white. All the blood drained from his face for the second time in 24 hours. Standing perfectly framed in the grand archway of the church entrance was me. I was wearing a razor-sharp tailored charcoal suit that contrasted violently with the pastel wedding colors filling the room. My posture was rigid and unyielding, my weight supported firmly by a sleek, custom-made black carbon fiber crutch. The polished metal cuff caught the light of the stained glass windows. Right beside me stood Simone. She looked like absolute terrifying royalty. She wore a tailored crimson dress that radiated federal authority and unapologetic power. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, her gaze locked directly on the cowardly man trembling at the altar. We did not wait for an invitation. We stepped forward in perfect unison. The solid, rhythmic click of my carbon fiber crutch hitting the marble floor echoed loudly with every single step we took. Click, click, click. The sound was a countdown, a death knell for Preston's entire fraudulent existence. The sea of bewildered, wealthy guests instinctively parted for us, pulling themselves back into their wooden pews as we marched down the center of the immaculate white aisle runner. Beverly tried to stand her mouth opening to scream in objection, but Alder Vanguard shot a cold, silencing glare in her direction that nailed her back to the wooden bench. Simone and I stopped precisely halfway down the long aisle. We stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front of absolute ruin. I looked directly at my brother, watching the last shreds of his manufactured confidence crumble into dust. "We object," Simone and I stated, our voices ringing out in perfect lethal unison. The words echoed against the vaulted stone ceilings, freezing the entire congregation in place. For a fraction of a second, absolute silence reigned in the cavernous sanctuary. Then total chaos erupted. 500 gasps filled the church simultaneously. Whispers ignited into a deafening roar. Camera shutters from the press corral outside began clicking furiously against the stained glass windows, eager to capture the collapse of the social event of the decade. Wealthy guests half stood in their wooden pews, craning their necks to see the spectacle unfolding in the center aisle. Beverly snapped out of her shock. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She hiked up the heavy silk skirt of her champagne gown, practically shoving an elderly guest out of her way, and charged down the aisle toward us. "Get out!" Beverly screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria as she pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "Security, remove this deranged woman immediately. She is trespassing." I stood perfectly still. I rested my weight firmly on my crutch, watching my mother lose her mind in front of the very society she worshipped. "You are ruining your brother's life because you are jealous and pathetic," Beverly shrieked, stopping just 3 feet away, her chest heaving with exertion. "You will not destroy this family. I paid for this wedding. I saved this day. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested." Simone smoothly stepped in front of me, shielding me from Beverly's frantic, flailing arms. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply reached into her tailored crimson dress, pulled out a black leather credential case, and held it high for the entire church to see. The gold shield flashed brilliantly under the chandeliers. "I am Special Agent Simone Davis, with the Internal Revenue Service," Simone announced, her crisp voice cutting through the hysteria like a scalpel. "And far more importantly to this specific occasion, I am Preston Charles's current legally wedded wife." A collective shriek went up from the bridesmaids clustered near the altar. Simone turned her piercing gaze directly onto the pale, sweating groom. "Any vows spoken today constitute felony bigamy," Simone continued, projecting her voice so the guests in the very back row could hear every single syllable. "Preston is currently under federal investigation for tax evasion, wire fraud, and severe embezzlement." At the altar, Courtney Vanguard looked like she had stopped breathing entirely. Her eyes darted wildly from Simone to the glowing federal badge and finally to the man she was about to marry. Preston opened his mouth, stammering incoherently, raising his hands in a pathetic, trembling gesture of denial. Courtney did not wait for a lie. She looked down at the massive cascading bouquet of white gardenias in her hands. With a sudden violent cry of absolute disgust, she pulled her arm back and hurled the heavy floral arrangement directly at Preston. The thick thorned stems struck him squarely across the face, leaving a bright red scratch down his cheek. White petals exploded over his custom tuxedo. Courtney gathered the massive skirts of her custom designer gown. She spun around, pushing past the stunned priest, and sprinted down the side aisle toward the vestry, sobbing uncontrollably. Arthur Vanguard did not chase his daughter. He simply stood at the front pew, staring at Preston with a look of cold, calculating execution. His media empire was safe. The parasite had been exposed before the ink could dry. Beverly whipped her head back and forth, watching the billionaire bride flee the church. Her ultimate prize was literally running out the door. "No," Beverly cried out, clutching her head in sheer panic. "Arthur, wait. This is a lie. We paid for this venue. I wired the final $100,000 this morning. I saved this wedding. We are a wealthy, respectable family." I looked at my mother, feeling a strange, hollow sense of pity mixed with profound, absolute justice. "You did not save anything, Mother," I stated clearly. My voice carried easily through the silent, horrified church. "You took out a predatory fast cash loan at 7 o'clock this morning to cover a bounced check. You used the family estate as your final piece of collateral." Beverly froze. Her eyes widened in sheer panic, her breath catching in her throat. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because you did not read the terms of service," I replied, taking a single deliberate step forward on my crutch. "You were too desperate to force this fake wedding to happen. The private equity firm you borrowed from is a subsidiary of my corporate restructuring agency." The blood completely drained from Beverly's face. Her knees buckled slightly, catching the edge of a wooden pew to keep herself upright. "You defaulted the moment Preston's assets were seized by the federal government an hour ago." I continued, delivering the final crushing blow. "I own your house, Mother. You traded the roof over your head to buy one single day of fake high society glory for a criminal. You have absolutely nothing left." Beverly collapsed onto the wooden bench, burying her face in her hands. She let out a long, wailing sob of total, irreversible defeat. Up at the altar, Preston watched his entire world disintegrate. His billionaire ticket was gone. His mother was homeless. The federal agent he tried to scam was standing in the center aisle, holding the badge that would send him to federal prison for the next 2 decades. His media empire, dreams, his offshore accounts, his stolen wealth, everything was gone. He looked down the long white aisle runner directly at me. He saw my calm, unflinching expression. He saw the carbon fiber crutch supporting the leg he had tried to destroy in a dark alley. Something inside Preston snapped. The polished, charismatic broker completely vanished. He was replaced by a cornered, rabid animal with absolutely nothing left to lose. "You psychotic piece of trash!" Preston roared, his voice cracking with pure, unhinged rage. He ripped his silk tie off his neck, throwing it to the floor. He spun around, his wild eyes locking onto a massive, solid brass candlestick resting on the edge of the front pew. It weighed at least 10 pounds. He grabbed the thick brass base, violently ripping it away from the floral display, sending candles and white petals scattering across the marble floor. He raised the heavy metal weapon high above his head. He let out a feral, guttural scream and charged directly down the center aisle. He sprinted full speed toward me, his dress shoes slapping against the floor, determined to finish exactly what he had started in that alley years ago. Guests screamed in terror, diving out of the way into the wooden pews to escape his path. Simone immediately dropped her stance, reaching instinctively for the holster concealed under her crimson dress. But I did not step back. I did not raise my arms to protect my face. I simply braced my weight firmly against my crutch, squared my shoulders, and stared dead into the eyes of the man charging at me. This time I did not flinch. The heavy brass candlestick began its downward arc, aimed directly at my skull. Preston's eyes were wide, completely manic, stripped of every ounce of the polished charm he had used to manipulate his way through his fraudulent life. A feral roar tore from his throat. I stood perfectly still. The carbon fiber cuff of my crutch dug firmly into my forearm. I did not blink. I did not brace for impact. I simply watched him fall into the final, inescapable trap I had set. He never even saw them move. From the second row of the sanctuary, 4 men in sharply tailored designer suits vaulted over the wooden pews with terrifying, synchronized speed. They were not wealthy wedding guests. They were undercover police officers carefully positioned by Simone just moments before the ceremony began. The lead officer hit Preston like a freight train. The impact was deafening. Preston was violently tackled, his body slamming hard against the polished marble floor of the center aisle. The heavy brass candlestick flew from his grip, skidding loudly across the stone and crashing into the base of a baptismal font. White gardenia petals rained down over the chaotic struggle as the four officers pinned the thrashing groom to the ground. "Get off me!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria as he fought wildly against the officers holding his arms behind his back. "She is lying. She is a psychotic, jealous liar. She is making all of this up to ruin me. Arthur, tell them. Tell them to get off me." Arthur. Vanguard did not move a single muscle. He stood in the front pew, looking down at Preston with the cold, detached disgust of a man inspecting a crushed insect. His silence was an absolute damning verdict. Beverly, however, had lost her mind entirely. She scrambled forward, her champagne silk gown tearing on the edge of a pew as she clawed her way toward the officers. "Let my son go!" Beverly shrieked, her face flushed a blotchy, furious crimson. "Do you know who we are? We are the Vanguard family. This woman is a stalker. She is a trespasser. Arrest her, not my son." Simone stepped effortlessly into Beverly's path, crossing her arms over her crimson dress. "Sit back down," Beverly Simone ordered, her voice radiating absolute federal authority. "Or you will be detained for interfering with a police investigation." Beverly froze, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish trapped between her arrogant entitlement and the undeniable reality of the gold badge hanging from Simone's neck. Preston continued to scream from the floor, twisting his face toward me. "Show them your proof, Blair," he spat, spit flying from his lips. "You have nothing. You are a bitter, crippled loser who cannot stand that I moved on. You have no proof." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply turned and walked, the rhythmic, steady click of my crutch echoing through the silent, terrified church. I made my way to the ornate wooden podium standing just beside the altar. The church's state-of-the-art public address system was wired directly into the microphone resting on top. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone along with a small auxiliary cable I had brought specifically for this moment. "You wanted proof, Preston," I said, looking down at him from the altar. I plugged the cable into the sound system. "Let us share it with the congregation." I tapped the screen. The pristine, million-dollar acoustics of the Fourth Presbyterian Church broadcast the audio file with absolute crystal-clear perfection. The sound of Beverly's sharp, arrogant voice echoed into the vaulted Gothic ceilings, raining down over the 500 horrified guests. "We have to do this quickly!" Preston Beverly's recorded voice rang out through the sanctuary. "Arthur Vanguard wants to see the final divorce decree by Friday. If that document is not filed, he is pulling Courtney out of the engagement." "I know," Mother Preston's voice echoed back, sounding stressed and calculating. "But Blair will not sign. She is dragging this out to audit my accounts. If she looks too closely at the holding companies, the feds will be alerted. Then we bypass her entirely." Beverly's voice stated with chilling, casual cruelty. "I know a notary who owes me a favor. We forge her signature on the final decree. The court will process it automatically. By the time she realizes she is legally divorced, you will already be married to the Vanguard fortune." A collective, synchronized gasp rolled through the crowded pews. Arthur Vanguard closed his eyes, his fists clenching at his sides. But the recording was not finished. "What if she shows up to the courthouse to contest it?" Preston asked on the tape. "She is stubborn. She will make a scene. She will not be walking anywhere." Beverly's recorded voice replied, a dark, sinister amusement lacing her tone. "I wired $10,000 to those men you mentioned in Southside. They know her routine. They will catch her in the alley behind her office. Once they smash that knee to pieces, she will be stuck in a hospital bed for months. She will not be fighting anyone." The audio cut off, leaving a suffocating, horrifying silence in its wake. The elite members of Chicago high society stared at Beverly and Preston as if they were staring at monsters. The sheer violent depravity of their conversation, played openly in a holy sanctuary, stripped away every ounce of their manufactured respectability. They were not high society. They were violent, desperate criminals. Preston stopped struggling. He lay flat against the cold marble, staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling. He knew it was over. There was no charm, no manipulation, no lie that could save him from the sound of his own voice. The lead undercover officer, a tall, broad-shouldered detective named Vance, hauled Preston up from the floor by his collar. He roughly pulled Preston's arms behind his back, the sharp, metallic snap of steel handcuffs echoing loudly in the quiet church. Preston Charles, Detective Vance stated, his voice booming with official finality. "You are under arrest for felony bigamy, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." Vance handed Preston off to two other officers, who began marching the ruined groom down the aisle toward the flashing red and blue lights now reflecting through the stained glass windows from the street outside. Then Detective Vance turned his cold, unforgiving gaze toward the front pew. Beverly was violently shaking. She was backing away slowly, her hands raised in a pathetic gesture of denial. That was manipulated. Beverly stammered, her voice breathless and high-pitched. That was artificial intelligence. It is a fake tape. I am a respectable woman. I am a victim here. Detective Vance stepped forward, pulling a second pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Save it for the judge," Vance said coldly. He grabbed Beverly by the wrists, spinning her around and slapping the heavy metal cuffs over her wrists, directly over her expensive diamond bracelets. "Beverly Charles, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit aggravated assault and felony forgery." Beverly let out a piercing, hysterical scream as the cold steel locked into place. "No, you cannot do this to me. I am innocent. I am Beverly Charles." "You are an inmate," Simone corrected sharply, stepping up right beside her, "and I will be seeing you in federal court." As the officers marched Beverly down the aisle, her champagne gown dragging across the discarded white gardenias, she looked back at me one final time. Her eyes were wide with a terror she had never known. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the crushing reality of a concrete cell. I stood at the altar, leaning comfortably on my carbon fiber crutch, and offered her a small, satisfied smile. My knee ached, but the pain felt entirely different today. It felt like victory. Exactly 1 month later, the dust had settled on the cathedral floor, but the federal machinery was just revving up its engines. The absolute fallout of the Vanguard wedding sting was swift, brutal, and entirely comprehensive. Preston's sham of a real estate business was dismantled with surgical precision. My corporate restructuring firm was appointed as the primary liquidator by the bankruptcy courts. It was a wonderfully poetic assignment. I sat at my polished glass desk in my penthouse office, sipping hot espresso while legally tearing my brother's fraudulent empire down to the bare, rotting studs. Every leased luxury sports car, every piece of staged designer office furniture, and every fabricated property portfolio was auctioned off for absolute pennies on the dollar. We seized his fake Rolex collection, liquidated his bloated expense accounts, and redirected every single cent to the creditors he had spent years aggressively defrauding. Preston was currently rotting in a federal holding facility, without the Vanguard backing and with his personal assets completely frozen by Simone's division at the IRS. He could not afford his astronomical bail. His desperate pleading phone calls to former high society friends went entirely unanswered. He was a pariah, a toxic liability that Chicago's elite had aggressively amputated from their social circles. The golden child was finally trapped in a concrete cage of his own making, facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. Beverly, however, had managed a temporary reprieve. She had drained the very last of her secret emergency accounts, liquidated her hidden offshore mutual funds, and pawned her remaining unseized jewelry to secure a bail bond. She was facing years in prison for her role in the forgery and the brutal attack in the alley, but her deeply ingrained delusions had not yet shattered. In her warped, narcissistic mind, she believed she could still salvage the situation. She believed she could return to her sprawling suburban estate, pour a glass of expensive wine, hire a ruthless defense attorney, and formulate a new master plan to spin her narrative as the ultimate victim of a tragic misunderstanding. An unbranded, cheap yellow taxi dropped Beverly at the end of her long, manicured driveway. She had no cars left to drive. She dragged her feet up the winding stone path. Her champagne silk gown from the wedding had long been replaced by wrinkled, generic gray sweatpants and a stained beige sweater. She looked haggard, her posture slumping under the crushing weight of her impending federal trial. Yet she marched up the grand stone steps to the heavy mahogany front door with a familiar, arrogant sense of entitlement, reaching into her designer bag for her keys. She slid the heavy brass key into the lock, but it refused to turn. She jiggled it frantically, her frustration instantly boiling over into anger. She shoved her shoulder against the heavy wood, rattling the handle, but the door remained entirely unyielding. The deadbolts had been professionally replaced. That was when she finally looked up and saw the bright neon green notice taped securely to the center of the door at eye level. It was an official court-mandated eviction notice. The document clearly stated that the property legally belonged to my private equity holding company, and the previous tenant had been formally locked out for severe default on a predatory loan agreement. Beverly let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. Her hands shook violently as she pulled her phone from her bag and dialed my personal number. She did not know I was already there, watching her every move. I sat in the driver's seat of my sleek black sedan, parked quietly in the heavy shadows of the sprawling oak trees lining the edge of the circular driveway. My phone vibrated in my center console. I tapped the screen to accept the call, letting the audio connect through the car speakers. Blair Beverly screamed into the receiver, her voice completely unhinged and bordering on a panic attack. "There is a mistake. There is a notice on my front door. The locks are changed. You have to fix this right now. I have nowhere to go. My friends will not answer my calls. You need to let me into my house." I calmly opened my car door and stepped out onto the driveway. The solid, rhythmic click of my carbon fiber crutch hitting the pavement instantly caught her attention. Beverly whipped her head around, dropping the phone from her ear as she watched me walk toward her. I climbed the stone steps to the grand porch, standing tall and perfectly composed in a sharp black trench coat. I was an absolute contrast to her trembling, pathetic, disheveled state. "You did this?" Beverly gasped, backing up against the locked mahogany door, as if trying to merge with the wood. "You took my home. You orchestrated all of this to ruin us. I am your mother. You cannot leave me out here on the street. I demand you give me the new keys immediately." I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger, pity, or hesitation. I reached into the deep pocket of my coat and pulled out a single neatly folded black plastic trash bag. I tossed it lightly through the cool evening air. It landed directly at Beverly's feet with a soft, dismissive thud on the stone porch. She stared down at the empty plastic bag, then looked back up at me, her eyes wide with total, uncomprehending shock. "You have exactly 5 minutes to gather whatever cheap toiletries you left in the patio storage bin." I stated, my tone colder than the winter wind blowing off Lake Michigan. "After that, I am calling the local police and having you arrested for criminal trespassing on private property." Beverly began to weep. Loud, wretched, theatrical sobs echoed across the empty estate, tears streaming down her pale, unwashed face. "How can you be so heartless?" she wailed, clutching her chest and sliding slowly down the front of the door until she hit the porch floor. "I am your family." I leaned forward slightly, resting my weight firmly on my carbon fiber crutch, and looked down at the woman who had paid men to shatter my leg in a dark alley. "You said you were glad someone finally put the trash in its place." "I completely agree, Mother. Get off my property." 30 days later, the heavy mahogany doors of the Cook County Family Courthouse swung shut behind Simone, sealing Preston's fate with a resounding, deeply satisfying click. She stood in the polished corridor, a certified legal document clutched securely in her manicured hand. The divorce was absolute, final, and ruthlessly efficient. Because Preston had utilized their marital status to facilitate a complex network of wire fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion, the presiding judge had shown absolutely zero leniency. The federal bankruptcy courts had already stripped his fraudulent real estate empire down to the bare studs, but Simone's legal team had aggressively targeted the remaining clean assets. As direct restitution for the massive financial liability he had secretly burdened her with during their marriage, the judge awarded Simone every single legitimate dollar Preston had left to his name. She now held the deeds to his two unencumbered luxury vehicles, the remaining balance of his legitimate stock portfolio, and the full contents of his only clean offshore safety deposit box. Even his prized vintage watch collection, which he had smugly flaunted at high society galas, now legally belonged to her. He was entirely permanently bankrupt. Simone slipped the decree into her leather briefcase. She did not feel sorrow or regret. She felt the incredible weightless sensation of a surgical extraction. The parasite had been completely removed. There was only one final piece of business left to conclude. Simone drove her newly acquired Mercedes directly from the courthouse to the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The sterile, aggressively fluorescent-lit visitor room was a stark, depressing contrast to the opulent cathedrals and penthouse suites Preston usually inhabited. The air smelled of industrial bleach and stale despair. She sat perfectly straight in a hard plastic chair, separated from the inmate holding area by a thick, smudged pane of bulletproof glass. She wore a tailored ivory suit, projecting the absolute authority of an untouchable federal agent. She crossed her legs and waited with cold, calculated patience. The heavy steel door on the other side of the glass buzzed open with a harsh metallic grind. Preston shuffled into the visitor booth. The physical transformation was staggering. The custom-tailored tuxedos, the expensive colognes, and the flawless $100 haircuts were completely gone. In their place was a broken, shuffling man in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His face was pale and gaunt, covered in a shaggy, unkempt beard. He looked exhausted, cornered, and deeply terrified. He sat down heavily and picked up the black telephone receiver with violently trembling hands. Simone picked up her receiver. Her face remained an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Simone Preston breathed, his voice cracking with desperate manufactured emotion. "You came. I knew you would not abandon me. I knew you still cared about us." Simone said nothing. She simply stared at him, watching the sweat bead on his forehead. "Listen to me, please," Preston begged, pressing his free hand flat against the thick glass. "It is a nightmare in here. They have me in maximum security lockup. The public defender they assigned me is completely useless. He does not understand the nuances of corporate restructuring. He says I am looking at decades behind bars. Decades, Simone. You have to help me. You are the only one who can." He leaned closer to the glass, deploying the exact same charming, soulful stare he had used to deceive her years ago. It was a pathetic display. "You have the federal connections," Preston continued, his voice growing frantic. "You know the prosecutors handling the tax evasion charges. You can talk to them off the record. You can tell them I was manipulated by my mother. Tell them Beverly forced me into the bigamy scheme to secure the Vanguard merger to save her own lifestyle. Tell them Blair set me up with her restructuring firm. I am a victim of a corporate vendetta, Simone." Simone raised a single eyebrow, letting his pathetic excuses hang in the dead air between them. "We were happy once," Preston whispered, dropping his voice into a trembling register of perfectly calibrated sorrow. "Before the money, before the pressure from my family, we loved each other. I am still the man you married. Please, Simone, use your clearance, pull some strings, talk to the judge, get them to offer me a plea deal. Just get my sentence reduced. I will do anything you want. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Simone listened to his entire desperate monologue without shifting a single muscle. She looked at the man who had stolen her identity, drained her credit, and attempted to legally marry a billionaire heiress while looking her directly in the eye and calling her paranoid. The sheer audacity was almost impressive, but mostly it was just pathetic. Simone smiled warmly. It was a genuine, radiant smile that completely terrified him. "I did help you," Preston. Simone said, her voice smooth, pleasant, and perfectly clear through the telephone receiver. "I handed over every single financial record, every hidden ledger, and every decrypted email to the federal prosecution team. I personally helped them trace the offshore accounts you thought were securely hidden behind shell corporations." Preston's jaw dropped. The remaining color drained completely from his face as his hand slid slowly down the glass. I helped the prosecution secure a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence without the slightest possibility of early parole. Simone continued her smile, never wavering. Enjoy the food. She placed the receiver back on the hook with a soft final click. The line went dead instantly, cutting off his frantic, muffled screams from the other side of the thick glass. Preston slammed his fists against the bulletproof barrier, his face contorted in absolute panic, but Simone had already turned away. She stood up, smoothed the pristine lapels of her ivory suit, and walked out of the sterile visiting room without looking back a single time. She pushed through the heavy double doors of the correctional center and stepped out into the bright, blinding Chicago sunlight. She breathed in the fresh air, stepping into her new life as a free, wealthy, and completely vindicated woman. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Marion Federal Penitentiary offered no flattering angles. 6 months had eroded every trace of Preston Charles's manufactured perfection. He knelt on the cold, damp concrete floor of the C-block communal restroom, a stiff, bristled brush gripped in his blistering, peeling hands. The smell of industrial bleach and raw sewage stung his eyes, a violent departure from the bespoke colognes and imported leather interiors he once surrounded himself with. He scrubbed furiously at a stubborn stain on the porcelain rim of the toilet, his oversized faded orange jumpsuit hanging off his gaunt, shrinking frame. The golden boy of Chicago high society, the man who had nearly conned his way into the Vanguard billionaire empire, was now just inmate 87402. A heavy work boot nudged his ribs. A corrections officer stood over him, tapping a wooden nightstick against the rusted metal stall door. "Get moving," Charles the guard stated coldly, pointing a thick finger at the base of the bowl. "And when you are done here, the shower's in D-block backed up again. Grab a mop." Preston swallowed the bitter bile rising in his throat. He did not charm his way out of the task. He did not flash $1 million smile or negotiate a better deal. He simply lowered his head, dipped the brush back into the murky bucket of gray water, and went back to scrubbing. There was no escape, no hidden offshore account to bail him out, and absolutely no one coming to save him. 200 miles away, the bells above the door of an elite Gold Coast dry cleaner chimed cheerfully. Beverly flinched at the sound. She stood behind the high laminate counter wearing a stiff, unflattering maroon polyester polo shirt with a plastic name tag pinned crookedly to her chest. Her hands, once adorned with diamonds and flawless manicures, were raw and cracked from handling harsh chemical solvents and heavy plastic garment bags for 10 hours a day. A sleek town car idled at the curb outside. The shop door swung open and in walked Eleanor Sterling, a woman who had once sat at Beverly's own dining table for weekly charity luncheons. Eleanor draped a custom mink coat over the counter, completely ignoring the woman standing behind it. "I need this hand cleaned by tomorrow afternoon," Eleanor demanded, tapping a manicured fingernail against the counter. "And make sure they do not use that cheap solvent on the lining this time." Beverly's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Eleanor, desperately waiting for a flash of recognition, a gasp of sympathy, anything to validate that she was still a human being. "Eleanor," Beverly whispered, her voice trembling with fragile, pathetic hope. "It is me. Beverly. Beverly Charles." Eleanor stopped tapping. She slowly raised her eyes behind a pair of oversized Prada sunglasses, taking in the maroon polo, the messy graying roots of Beverly's uncolored hair, and the desperate pleading look in her eyes. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. "I said tomorrow afternoon," Eleanor repeated, her voice dripping with absolute freezing indifference. "Can you manage that? Or do I need to speak to your manager?" Beverly's chest caved in. The social execution was flawless. She was no longer a fallen peer. She was the help. She was entirely invisible. "Yes, ma'am." Beverly choked out her hands, shaking violently as she printed the claim ticket. She handed the receipt across the counter, watching the high society she had sacrificed everything for walk out the door without looking back a single time. I did not walk with a limp. I stepped out of the private elevator and onto the top floor of my restructuring firm, the sharp, authoritative click of my designer heels echoing through the expansive glass lobby. The carbon fiber crutch was gone, permanently relegated to a dark closet. My knee was completely healed, supported by sheer willpower, grueling physical therapy, and the undeniable, intoxicating high of absolute victory. I walked into the massive glass-walled boardroom. The managing directors were already seated around the long mahogany table. They did not look at me with pity. They looked at me with profound, undivided respect. Over the past 6 months, I had successfully liquidated 3 massive fraudulent empires, recovered millions for defrauded investors, and spearheaded the complete financial autopsy of Preston's illegal holding companies. The senior managing partner stood up at the head of the table, raising a crystal glass of sparkling water. Blair. He began, his voice projecting across the silent room. Your performance over these last 2 quarters has been nothing short of predatory perfection. You took a complicated, highly public mess and turned it into the most profitable liquidation in this firm's history. Effective immediately, the board has unanimously voted to name you senior partner. Deafening applause erupted around the table. I smiled, a genuine, powerful expression of pure achievement. I had not relied on a wealthy husband. I had not forged documents or shattered someone's bones to get here. I had built my empire with my own 2 hands, brick by unrelenting brick. The evening air high above the Chicago skyline was crisp and perfect. I stood on the sprawling terrace of my penthouse, leaning against the glass railing. The city lights stretched out before me, an endless ocean of glowing gold and brilliant white against the darkening sky. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute freedom of the moment. The sliding glass door hummed open. Simone stepped out onto the terrace, looking impeccably sharp in a tailored emerald green jumpsuit. She carried 2 crystal flutes and a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. She walked over, her posture radiating the relaxed confidence of a woman who had just deposited a massive, legally seized fortune into her untraceable accounts. You know, Simone said, popping the cork with a soft, satisfying sigh, I always thought the view from the Vanguard estate was impressive. But I have to admit, this completely ruins it. She poured the golden liquid into the flutes, handing one to me. The view is always better when you own the building, I replied, accepting the glass. We stood side by side, looking out over the sprawling metropolis. Down there, somewhere in the shadows, Preston was scrubbing concrete floors, and Beverly was steaming coats for minimum wage. Up here, we breathed the clean, rare air of total vindication. Simone turned to me, raising her crystal flute into the evening breeze. A bright, genuine smile illuminated her face. To the golden children, Simone toasted the crystal, catching the city lights. I looked down at my perfectly healed leg, then back out to the sprawling, glittering city I now conquered. I raised my glass to meet hers, the sharp, melodic chime of crystal ringing out into the night. And to the scapegoats who dig their graves, I finished. We drank, our triumphant laughter carrying out over the edge of the balcony, echoing into the dark, limitless sky. The screen faded to black. The most powerful lesson from this narrative is that your true value is never determined by those who constantly belittle you. Often the people closest to us, even family, can project their own insecurities onto us, casting us as the scapegoat to maintain their fragile dynamics. However, silent perseverance and building your own independence become the ultimate secret weapons. True strength lies not in seeking their validation, but in quietly cultivating your own success and walking away from toxic environments with your head held high. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to protect your peace? Share your experience and comment below.